Welcome to the Tenant Podcast. I'm Todd Pearson here with my friend, partner, and the man that has swam 1/20th of the English Channel, co-host extraordinaire, Wes Brown.
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. That was only like a couple years ago. And I tried to swim across the channel and 1/20th is as far as I got. That's what they told me. Water was cold. I was freezing my butt off. So I had to bail.
Did you not have the proper equipment? Did you not have like a wetsuit or dry suit?
No, I just went in my Speedos and just went.
Didn't like old school English Channel swimmers
I think they
like
greased down.
Right, like bacon grease?
Yeah,
like
something like that.
Rub yourself down with bacon grease?
Yeah.
But then
I didn't do that. I was somebody just
then
I was in a pub.
Bait,
I was
right?
I was in a pub on the coast and they said, I bet you can't swim the channel. I'm like, game on. So
How many pints did you have in you?
2 or 3. But
Okay.
I didn't get
take
very
much.
far.
You're such a cheap date.
I am a cheap date. And
next thing you know, your clothes are off and you're covered in some kind of grease.
Some dude handed me a Speedo and I was on, wasn't even my Speedo because I don't even own Speedos.
I just got really grossed out with that thought because I'm a germaphobe. I was all right with the grease thing, but yeah.
But not somebody else's Speedo.
All right. Thank you, everybody. It was a great week. Nice episode.
And of course, like every other week, if you believe that story that I swam 1/20th of the channel, we got another adventure for you next week. So stay tuned.
All right. Let's talk some art.
We should do that. Yeah, let's do that. Introduce our guest and we'll just roll with this.
We just recently became familiar with this week's guest, his work. He's a fantastic artist, and we are excited to talk with him. Welcome to the program, Joey Kerlin. Joey, how are you this evening?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I always end up hanging out with people who talk about getting greased up, so I'm glad to be part of this.
This is going to be a really great conversation.
That's right. It's like greasing up a pig during some of those rodeos. That's always fun too. And then chasing the pig and, falling in the manure. And yeah, so that's fun too. Todd, have you done any grease pig stuff?
No, sir. That's
okay.
Nope.
Next time you're in South Dakota, we'll grease up a hog and go at it.
This is not my wheelhouse, dude. All right. We're here to talk about art. Joey, tell our listeners what you do and what mediums you work in.
So historically, I actually got my degree in ceramics, and I was a studio potter for several years. So I was living the dream, making art, selling it, paying bills with it. I had a professor once who really influenced me, and she's like, if you really want to become a successful artist, to me, the hallmark of that is like insurance and, paying rent. And in those ways, I was a successful artist for a while. And so I did that for a long time. I did production wear mostly to kind of pay the bills. The nice thing is you can always sell, 50 mugs to make rent or whatever. But I really liked doing sculptural work, some figurative stuff, some installation work. But it was all ceramics. I liked the technicality of the media. One of the things that I often told people is that you have to know what you're doing with ceramics, unlike a lot of other fields. So, if you don't do the right thing on a drawing or on a painting, like it doesn't look good. And if you don't do the right thing on a piece of ceramic, like it explodes and it's in pieces and it destroys your kiln and, it becomes a problem. Or worse, you could poison yourself if it's functional wear, if you're not using a good glaze. I was real snooty about it for a really long time. And some of it was unhealthy. And then some of it was just because I loved the materiality of it and the physicality of it. But then over time, I have grown away from that. And I actually haven't done ceramics professionally in my art practice in probably about 5 or 6 years. Mostly what I'm doing now is actually collage work, which in some ways I can't imagine a greater departure. In other ways that I'm sure we'll talk about tonight, there's a lot of the same things that are kind of going on. Less snooty though. So anybody who's worried about that, don't worry too much.
So did this start at a young age, you being interested in art and doing art?
Yeah. So both of my folks were teachers. Mom taught home ec and dad taught history mostly, but he subbed for a lot of years. And he actually ended up getting away from teaching just to be at home. My folks had kind of made a deal that whoever had the more stable position in a career, that's what they would do. And then the other parent would kind of help transition us through school, et cetera. So, and as it turned out, my mom just got the more stable teaching positions. So dad taught, but he subbed like 11 of the 17 years he taught. And so neither of them were particularly art-minded. They sang, they played some instruments, but it wasn't anything, really over the top. My siblings as well. My older brother's an accountant. My older sister's a nurse. My younger sister works for the Dumb Friends League, actually, but got her degree in creative writing. So she was kind of the closest on the creative track. But for me, they always supported my art. And from a very young age, I had some really unique opportunities that I would love to say that I deserved, and I absolutely didn't. I just kind of lucked out in a lot of ways. One of the things is that I got involved in gifted and talented programs really young, which just opened the door to a lot of opportunities. And I remember when I was in 6th grade, I entered into an exhibition that was held at Metro's campus, and it was like a district-wide exhibition. And I won first place for this gigantic picture of a dragon that probably weighed like 80 pounds and was just like, my dad still has it. And I look at it and I'm like, oh man, bless my teacher for letting me like fire that bad boy. Cause it was a monster. The fact that it didn't explode, I obviously knew what I was doing from a young age, or, God loved me or something, but it was cool. And it was a really good shot in the arm. I actually ended up selling another piece that I had entered into that show. So like my first sale was from when I was in like 6th grade, and I won this art competition. So it was like a really big shot in the arm. Then I went to George Washington, is where I went to high school, and we were blessed to have a ceramics program. Actually, that's pretty unusual for most schools, even now, but especially then. It was kind of a bygone era. We had a gas kiln and everything, and a dedicated ceramics teacher. And I tracked through. I remember my senior year, I had my first period was study hall. My second period was like AP ceramics or something like that. Third period was ceramic studio assistant. Fourth period was like private advanced study ceramics. And then I think I had like a speech class. And like that was my entire like last semester of high school. But even earlier on, I did this thing through the mayor's office, the Office of Art and Cultural Affairs. They launched this program called Arts Street, which to my understanding is still in operation. I should reach out to them actually and let them know, like, hey, congratulations, you helped foster somebody. But basically it was a opportunity for student artists to intern with professional artists and do apprenticeships, but we were paid as well. And we were actually commissioned by the city to do performances and installations. The first year I did a performance for the launching of the then new offices that they were opening for low-income housing, I think. And then the next year I did that same apprenticeship in the summer. And we actually put some sculptures on permanent installation in City Park that were only taken down just a couple of years ago because they'd kind of gotten beat up over the years. So that was a really cool experience, from the very beginning, which to no surprise, then I transitioned into getting my degree in art as well.
That sounds like a phenomenal program. Who did you apprentice under when you were part of that program?
I am unfortunately remiss. I don't remember the first guy's name. He was doing a lot of real interesting performative work with like instruments and like he was reclaiming objects. And then the second guy I apprenticed with the second year where we did the installations in City Park was Joe Ritchie. And I know he's still doing work. He's doing a lot more monumental scale stuff now. And I could be wrong. Please correct me if I am. I think the shipping containers that are kind of over near Rhino, where the shipping containers are kind of like cut and put back together. I'm pretty sure that's one of his pieces that he installed. But Joe Ritchie, RITCHE, I believe, was the second guy. And he was pretty cool because his undergrad was in like mechanical engineering. And then his master's degree he got from DU in fine arts and sculpture. And so his work was very cerebral in its like mechanical functions. He had things that were literally kinetic, but then he'd also play with things like he had a piece where there was like $100 bill just sitting on a bear trap. And the bear trap was actually like active, and it was in a gallery. So you could like walk up and like trip this trap, but he'd taken a torch to it and like taken the tension out of the spring or whatever. So he's smart enough to know, like, you know, I don't need to get sued for this thing, but it was just interesting. Some of the stuff that he was doing, I don't think he would have, had he not had that background in engineering.
Sounds like it was a great experience.
Yeah.
Out of high school, you go to where to university?
So I went to Metropolitan State College of Denver. I had a family member who was pretty wealthy, and they told me like, hey, by the way, anywhere you want to go to school, like we'll take care of it. It's on me. And so I was like, yeah, I want to go to Metro, which is just like a local state school. And they were like, no, I don't. Come on, like you can go anywhere you want. I was like, no, I want to go to Metro. To this day, I think it's one of the best art programs in Colorado. You get the most bang for your buck. I mean, it's a pretty inexpensive school relative to places like CU, DU, which I think both of those have good art programs too, but there's just something kind of special about Metro. So yeah, I went there and I double majored in fine arts with emphasis in ceramics. And I also got a second degree in philosophy. It really wasn't an emphasis, but a lot of aesthetics was kind of part and parcel of what I was studying.
We've talked to numerous artists on the podcast that have attended Metro State University, and they all have said exactly what you just said, as far as it being a great program and quality instructors and just overall just a fantastic experience. So you graduate from MSU, and then you launched your own ceramics business, and that's when you jumped off as being a full-time artist. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. I in the interim, while I was seeking my degrees, I ended up getting married and started having kids. But I lived in Aurora actually while I was graduating, and got my degrees and launched my own little studio. And most of it was really just selling functional wear. There'd be some more kind of upper end stuff, like some cool goblets where I would do like salt firelings or something like that. But for the most part, it was just, mugs and bowls and plates and, just kind of dinner sets. I mentioned that both my parents were teachers, and they were a little skeptical about the idea of me being a full-time artist. That's not something that there's a lot of support for in our culture right now to do as a career. But again, continue to be supportive. They'd always told me as a kid, like, we don't care what you do, just don't become a teacher like us, because we know what it's like. As I was married, I ended up having more kids, and I needed a little more stable income. It was okay for me as a single man. It was okay even early starting a family, but it got to the point where I needed to have a little more stability. So I started helping out with like homeschooling co-ops, things like that in the community. I had a kilner wheel, and so to some degree it was just the resources available, but I knew what I was talking about as well. So it was fun to be able to do those things. I'd do some workshops or maybe even a semester or something for a class a week. And then eventually I was like, oh, this is fun. I'm enjoying it. I should probably look into, the public schools and see what they have to offer. And they kept asking me questions like, hey, where'd you have the license? And I didn't have answers to those questions because I didn't have a license. And I'm like, can't you just tell me if I'm good at teaching? And, if I am, then give me a degree or give me a license or whatever. And they're like, that's not how that works. So I actually ended up going back to Metro to start seeking my teaching license, despite my parents' rebukes. But I guess it's in my blood to some degree. And then there was a small little district in Beque, Colorado, which...
So where's Beque, Colorado? Because I don't think most people know where Beque is.
Yeah, so if you're out of state, you definitely wouldn't know where Beque is. And if you're in state, you definitely wouldn't know where Beque is, because there's nothing there. It's on the western slope. So that's already, one hit against it. If you're from Colorado, that already alienates like half the state. But it's actually along the 70 corridor. So it's right before the Grand Junction Canyon. So like literally right before the canyon, there's this tiny little turnoff. And if you want to get gas, you can stop there. I think it's the westernmost pot shop in Colorado right now as well. So, if you happen to be coming through from the other way, then those are the two reasons people would stop there. To not be hyperbolic at all. Like, this is literally a true statement. When my family and I moved there, we increased the population 1%. It's that small of a town. So I'd never heard of it. Literally. I mean, people were like, where's Beque? I'm like, I have no idea. Like, over there somewhere. But because of its tininess and its weirdness and like, you know, it's not a bad town. It's little, you know. That's actually why I was able to start teaching, because so you can get something called an emergency license as a teacher. And most emergency licenses are granted to, you know, people who want to go teach like in Harlem and like teach math or something like that, or like these like really, you know, underprivileged and difficult places to teach. And as it turns out, Beque, Colorado was just desperate for any teachers. Like if anybody was willing to teach there and was qualified to teach, like they were happy to do it. So they actually granted me an emergency license. And what that means is they let me teach and they told me if I was good enough. And then if I was good enough, they gave me a license. So all the things that I'd been told weren't possible for years, I was like, oh, you could have just told me about this thing. And sure enough, that's exactly what I did. I taught K-12. And by K-12, I mean every day. So I had high school was first period and kindergarten was second period. And it went like that the rest of the day. And I have nothing bad to say about that district, but it was hard. It was really, really hard. I mean, just that much volume of doing that many preps or whatever was a real challenge. But I'd been teaching in the private sector for about 6 years. It's not like I didn't know what I was doing. And it was great. It was really wonderful. They let me try stuff out. I was having like the kindergartners and the seventh graders collaborate on projects, and they just kind of let me roll with it.
Sounds like it was probably pretty challenging putting together that kind of programming for that, you know, all those different age groups.
Yeah, it's where I really gained the confidence to just do the things that I was doing in my private teaching and realized that it translated well. You know, what I was doing didn't have to be as academic instructionally as I was starting to be led to believe when I started seeking my teaching license. I think a lot of the problems that we have in academia in general, but particularly in academia and the arts, is that it's just so formulaic. You know, so it's like, oh, when you're this age, you learn about mosaics and you use craft paper to like do a mosaic of a cat or whatever. And I actually got in trouble with parents all the time because they would come to me and they'd be like, oh, that's Valentine's Day. Like, are you going to do any Valentine's stuff? And I'd be like, oh, probably not. And I'm like, oh, but like, we always love getting the kids stuff, you know, when they do Valentine's projects. And I was like, great, then you should do some projects with your kids. Like, I'm not stopping you. Like, I don't care. But instead I would do things like, so St. Valentine's Day, right, which we're all loosely familiar with, so actually based on a real saint. Ironically, that's not his feast day, though. That feast day is the feast of St. Cyril and Methodius, who brought Christianity to like Eastern Europe. So the Cyrillic alphabet, like the Russian alphabet, it's called the Cyrillic alphabet because St. Cyril invented it, right? It's named after him. So I would teach the kids about like St. Cyril and Methodius, and then I would start teaching them about like Russian iconography and stuff. And that's what we do for Valentine's Day. So the parents were always like, why do you have pictures of like, you know, Byzantine icons or something? Like the kids are bringing these home. And I was like, well, you know, sorry, you know. And I eventually moved into the point where I just stopped giving assignments and I just let kids make work, and I would teach them about the theories and what beauty looked like. And I would show them new techniques, but I never was like, okay, do a self-portrait of you if you were a cat or like whatever, you know. And so there was this love-hate relationship. Well, the kids loved me. There was just a love relationship there. The parents had a love-hate relationship, and some of the other teachers had their theories about me as well. But I was just seeing kids thrive, and I liked it, and I was having fun with it, and, you know, really pushing boundaries of what I thought teaching was like in, you know, elementary school especially, but even some of the stuff that the high schoolers were doing. Because, you know, I went through public school. I knew what it was like and some of the stuff I was taught. And, I'm like, I don't have time for that anymore. Like, I just want the kids making beautiful stuff. And they did. And it was great.
So you gave them more of a foundation and a jumping off point without giving them exactly what they had to do or a specific project per se, looser parameters. And really, it sounds like you were teaching them critical thinking, which is something that we don't get a lot of in this modern day and age in our public school system.
Yeah, you know, it highlighted a couple of major gaps. And this had nothing to do with the district. I think this is sort of a universal for the way that we just treat kids and teach kids in America right now. Critical thinking was definitely one of them. And so I was forcing the kids to do criticisms of work too. So my older students, I was having them pick contemporary works of art that had to be made in the last 50 years and give me criticisms. And it was all scaffolded. You know, I'm not expecting them to, you know, look at a piece of work and, you know, give me some kind of art theoretical thing. But it's like, look, Do you like it? Do you not like it? And why? That's really all I would be asking. And I would start demanding certain academic language from them. But again, super scaffolded. I would, be regularly teaching them these words, but I wouldn't have like vocabulary tests. I would just start peppering them into conversation. So it's like, oh, what's juxtaposition? Well, I've been using it for the last 6 weeks, But then the other part of it was the real difficult growing period where I didn't tell them what to do because they were so used to just being told what to do. And so like, okay, it's, ready for the next project. I want you guys to do a project that explores destruction. And I'd like for you to use paper. The kids were like, great. What do we draw? I'm like, oh, you don't have to draw. I'm like, oh, what's it supposed to look like? I don't know. And what's great is like second graders were like, yeah, and just went at it. Like there was no questions. They were just like tearing stuff apart and like making things. But like fifth graders were like stuck. They didn't know what to do and they were afraid of making mistakes and whatever. And so it was neat to guide them. And looking at that period of time, I realized that there's a lot of reasons why teachers don't do that. Because man, that's a lot of work as a teacher, because you basically, instead of doing one project that you have to figure out a rubric for, then you have 25 projects or whatever, and it becomes exponential. And the kids start asking these very beautiful, challenging questions that you're like, all right, I guess we're going down this avenue now. But it was good. I think that learning skills is important, but if you want to become a good drawer, then go draw for 20 years. It's just a practice thing. But knowing what beauty looks like, knowing what composition looks like, knowing how to ask interesting questions, giving yourself rules as a maker, like that's the stuff I was really seeing the kids, take it and run with.
I think it's hard for people. I'll raise my hand to this too, is if I'm trying to think creatively, or, if somebody says, hey, I need you to do a project, just kind of coming up with an idea sometimes is really, really difficult. So in having somebody kind of teach you, like, here's how you develop ideas and flush them out and look at it differently. And so I think that's important.
Yeah, for sure. And as much as I say I didn't give assignments, that's not totally true. I didn't give projects. One of the assignments that I was real strict about was keeping a regular sketchbook and knowing how to use a sketchbook and that kind of creative process, because that's, where work is born out of. And I would do daily exercises with the kids. So every single day while I'm taking roll and stuff, they knew to pull their sketchbooks out. Now it's time to answer this question. And sometimes the question was like, draw a thing, or like, whatever, it wasn't always like a written answer. Sometimes it was. And I was definitely of the mindset that, I don't have an expected way for you to respond to this. This is the whole point, is that we're like generating ideas. So, and that's where that ton of work as a teacher came in, where I was basically having to run an idea factory. And I'm like, I know it's going to start inspiring kids' ideas, coming up with those processes, and then watching the kids extrapolate their own information from it.
How many years did you teach then?
Yeah, so I only ended up teaching in Beque for a year. I hadn't intended on leaving. I felt a little guilty about it, actually, because the way that the emergency license works is there's a 1-year probationary period. You have like a mentor teacher, and you have to do a presentation at the end of the year. Here's how I think I grew, keep a journal, etc. And after that year, then they can grant you your initial license, just like you'd finished with your teaching license through school. And I did finish that period. And actually in April is when the school up the road, the high school up the road for me, they had just announced that they were going to be switching out art teachers. The previous art teacher had been there like 20 years. The guy before him, like 25. So I was the third art teacher in, 40 something years. And they were launching an AP studio art program. This was the first time AP was going to be offered at the high school. And I really always wanted to teach AP. I thought it was a really interesting level of rigor. I love teaching little kids, not in classrooms. In workshop environments, it's great. one-on-one is great, but 22 second graders in the same room at the same time is just like disordered. Like it's so weird it's not healthy, and it makes me feel weird. And I didn't toe the line in so many ways. I didn't have the kids like walk in lines when they went to the bathroom because I didn't care, and there was just like stuff like that. And every teacher you talk to, they kind of have a proclivity toward a different age. And it's like, oh, I love elementary school kids for this reason, or middle school kids for this reason, or high school kids for this reason. And I get them, and I like all of those reasons. But there's just less peeing your pants and bloody noses when you're a high school student, or at least not for the same reasons as when you're in elementary. And I just don't want to deal with all that stuff. Like, It's fine. And if it's my own kids, I have no problem, but I want to focus. And I never would dumb stuff down, and not to the point where it was unapproachable, but I was expecting a certain level of rigor, and I wanted to get into some more conceptual kind of stuff. And I was definitely getting kids at different ages to do it, but there's no question that high school opens up a different intellectual avenue than the lower grades. And so, especially with AP on the horizon, I was like, I got to do it. I got to try for this thing. And I applied, and the middle school, so this was in Parachute, Colorado, which most people still don't know, but at least you may have like gotten a t-shirt at the, rest stop there or something once. So the middle school and the high school were both hiring at the same time. I didn't even know about the middle school really, and I wasn't interested in it per se, but I applied for the high school position. And when I interviewed, the middle school teacher was one of the guys on the interview panel. And he said, well, excited to see you tomorrow to interview for the middle school position as well. And I was like, absolutely, I will be there. Because I just wanted to impress this guy, And so they have a teaching philosophy in the middle school called expeditionary learning, which I like the idea of. And basically the premise is like, look, everything should be focused on one notion, because in our lives, we're all focused on the same thing. So it's like, oh, when you guys do a podcast, are you using different skills than when you whatever? And it's like, well, no, it's all part of my life, And so expeditionary learning, you take an expedition, which is some theme for the year, and everything is based on that. So one year it's like, the first trip to the moon, or some years it's like the Colorado River or whatever. So say it's like, oh, great. Well, in science, we're talking about the microbes you can find in the Colorado River. And in history, we're going to learn about how Lewis and Clark used it to discover things or whatever. I love the idea, and it just becomes a little forced, a little quick. But it was cool, and it was interesting talking to the group of people. And the middle school principal afterwards said, look, you're the top candidate for both positions, and you just need to tell us who you want to teach. And I was like, I just want to teach high school. I really want to teach AP. And he was like, great, I'm going to recommend you for that position. And sure enough, I was hired at the high school in Parachute. And it was great. It was really, really good. I got to teach ceramics again. I had a dedicated ceramic studio. I was doing a little bit of clay at Beque, but I just didn't have the facilities for it. I was in a converted science room, which was just difficult. And then AP, I went full bore. I said, okay, from the beginning of the semester, I'm not going to give you projects. You have X number of shows you have to be in by the end of the year. You have X number of pieces you have to create. You have to curate at least one show of your own. And I just set the groundwork. And I said, I'm going to treat you like you're really artists, because right now you are. I don't care what everybody else is talking about. I don't care what your chemistry teacher says. And I never called my students. I called them artists when they walked in the classroom, and I treated them like that. And they were in professional shows that had nothing to do with the school district. And they were winning awards and doing great. And all of my kids got qualifying scores the first year that I taught AP. And my principal was like, how'd you do it? How did you get all your kids to get qualifying scores? And I'm like, because I didn't treat them like kids. They were just making art. And I showed them what a professional art making practice looked like. And I was blessed to have the kids that just really, really ran with it.
That sounds like a fantastic experience. And I think that's so cool that you didn't, I think that's where teachers lose kids a lot of times, because they dumb things down and they treat them like they're dumb, right? Like no kid wants that. If you treat them like they're equals, like you set the tone, like you said, you treated them like artists, you see them flourish. Even in Beque, it sounded like you were experiencing the same thing. It was just a bit more challenging because you had all these different age groups that you were working with, right?
Yeah, for sure. And, this was kind of the beginning of giving back for the experiences I had. I mean, I was blessed because of my circumstances in a lot of ways, because of supportive family and some, nice programs that I had been privileged to be able to be part of, that I was being treated as an artist from a young age. I was in shows and I was apprenticing, and, it's like I saw the fruits of that in my own life. And then I had the added benefit of being a professional artist before I became a teacher. And I really think that's what made me a good teacher, ironically. I actually ended up getting a special certification, a CTE certification, so career technical education. You have to have at least 6 years in a field and then become an educator. So most of the people that do it end up being like shop teachers, because they used to be construction workers or something like that. Or sometimes you'll have like a math teacher that was an accountant or whatever. But it was a pretty cool thing, because basically, instead of me telling you what you should do to become an artist, I was like, here, just do it. Like, this is real things that I would do in my daily practice. And then later I would be like, oh, right, I have to have grades. 5, like whatever. Like it was, and actually that was one of the really nice things about my approach to it, is because when the kids really excelled, I didn't have to prove that they excelled, because it was evident. So the second school I taught at was actually a standards-based grading. So it wasn't A, B, C, D, F. It was 1, 2, 3, 4. And what that meant was like, look, a 2 is that you kind of understand it, but you're still learning. A 3 is that you understand the standard. And, Colorado and most states have teaching standards. So it's like, look, can you use critical language to examine a piece of work, for example? And then a 4 was basically applying those skills. And so I had a student who, she was a junior when I came in, and I didn't know her family or anything. I didn't know anybody in this community. But apparently her older sister was like the artist in the family and did really well previously with the other art teacher. And this girl was like not an art girl, but she wanted to take art, and she liked who I was as a teacher, and she liked my approach. Thankfully, she trusted me. And so every day for like a month, she would be just like making crap. Like it was just not working. It was like literally pieces were falling apart, or other times it just like, it would never manifest. But she was diligent about her sketchbook, above and beyond anything I asked. Like she was an artist keeping a sketchbook, and that was, and whether I saw it or not, she didn't care. It was her. She owned it. And one day she was like, I'm so frustrated. I don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, you have a piece due in a week for the show. And she's like, I know, I don't have anything. And I was like, you'll find something. Don't worry about it. So she was like an animal rights girl. She was very much about like, oh, we need to protect animals, etc. And surprisingly, she brought in like a rabbit pelt. I was like, what is this? And she's like, this is the only animal I've ever killed. And I was like, oh, like that's intense. And she had a canvas that she'd painted, and it was just like painted red, like it was just a single color. And she got the pelt, and she got a negative cutout of a rabbit out of like some really thick cardstock, and with these real primitive marks stitched it onto the canvas, so you could see like the fur coming out of the rabbit silhouette. And I was like, that's amazing. Like that's an amazing piece. And she's like, what are you talking about? Like, it's incredible. Like that's the best piece I've seen of anybody all year. And she's like, it took me 10 minutes to make that thing. And I was like, no. It took you 2 months to make that thing. I've been watching you struggling for months and months and months to get to this point. It might've taken you 10 minutes to put the pieces together, but that's more, like, and she really was like, oh, work is more than just the making, And so I was like, hey, I want to enter you into this professional show that's going to be in Glenwood Springs. And she's like, no, I don't think so. I'm like, well, tough, because I already entered you, and it's like happening like tomorrow or whatever. So, and she won Best in Show. She won like a Juror's Choice Award, which wasn't me, right? That had nothing to do with me. I knew what it looked like. I thought it was beautiful, but it was purely somebody outside of the school, professional artists who were choosing work and saying like, this is quality work. This is what professional art looks like. And so I gave her a 4, of course, because I'm like, you did it. You applied. You clearly understood it enough for somebody in the art world to pay attention to it. Like, you did the thing.
You went through the whole process. You did the work. And even when you're struggling, because everybody struggles, it's not because you're an artist and you're this really ultra creative person all the time. Sometimes projects, pieces fight you, right? and you have to just work through it. And she did the work. She proved herself. And I can't imagine how she felt. Like that must have just been an amazing experience for her. How did she react when she found out that she had won?
Oh, she was over the moon. I mean, she trusted me before, but I could have told her to do anything. I'd have been like, hey, jump off this bridge. She'd be like, okay, I guess I'm jumping off the bridge. Like she implicitly trusted me after that, knowing, and again, I was an artist imparting my experience and understanding. I didn't act like the art teacher. And I think that was fundamentally what it was. And that's what she realized. And she wasn't the only kid that was experiencing similar things, but you know, I saw a shift in her from that point forward where she was less worried. Like she was making way bigger risks, way bigger messes, you know, from that point on. And her work was great. And so I think sometimes there's beauty in the struggle, you know, like while you're combing through and digging and getting your fingernails dirty, it's like, that's when you're going to unearth the gems.
Yeah, had to been a pivotal moment for her. Are you still in contact with her to this day? Do you still know if she's out there creating, being an artist?
Unfortunately not. There's a couple of students that I really wish I knew what was going on with after I left teaching. Unfortunately, the way that I left teaching did not afford me the way to keep track of certain people.
And that comes to the next part of our story. Talk about that, because you had all the success, but at some point the wheels start to fall off the bus, right?
Yeah. So, so the question earlier was like, how long did you teach? And like, well, I taught a year in Beque and I taught a year at Parachute. And it was not much long after that I actually quit teaching. So there was a lot of things that were going on at the time. So like you said, there was a lot of success. There was a lot of beautiful stuff going on. I was making really meaningful strides in my career. I was being invited to give presentations to other teachers. People were kind of paying attention to the work that I was doing. And my personal life was a mess. I had been married for several years at that point. I had 4 children, and sparing all the gory details, my home life was not great. And I never wanted to come home. And the only reason I would come home is because my kids were there. And it was rough. And it got to the point where I actually became homeless for about 9 weeks at the end of a semester. So I was still teaching, and I would come home and I would like help take care of my kids, do dinner, get them to bed, and then like go sleep in my truck. And I had a key to the school. So like I could go in to shower up at the weight room, and I could do my laundry like in the janitor's closet and stuff like that. I like that I get to laugh about these things now because it sucked. I mean, it was a really tough time in every possible way. I mean, there's a physicality that's hard about being homeless. You're just never comfortable. And I was homeless with a truck, at least had somewhere to be. But it's also, there's a lot of shame that's just built into it. One night was like super cold. And so I ended up sleeping like under my desk at school. And I had somebody who's knocking on my door. I was like, oh shit. So I like threw my pants on and I opened the door. I didn't have shoes on yet. And one of my students was like, hey, I'm going to drop something off before school. But I just wanted to drop this off. And then I got to go run a lap for soccer or something like that. And I was like, okay. And then he was like, did you just wake up? And I was like, oh no, I definitely didn't just wake up. But it sucked. It was really hard. I was at the beginning of doing some court stuff to fight for my kids. But it got to a point where life was too hard. And especially when the semester ended, then I didn't have anything to do. Right. I mean, one of the worst things about being homeless is like the isolation and the boredom. As much as we hate our jobs sometimes and it's like, I don't want to go to work today. It's like, boy, it's nice to be meaningful. I didn't have access to my checks that were coming in. They were being intercepted at home. And so I had like a really limited amount of money for the summer. And there was all the stress going on with, the separation. And I I was becoming dangerous to myself. The more downtime I had, the more dangerous I became, not to other people, but like, thoughts start creeping in. And so, here I am, this guy who loves the technical nature of ceramics and the physicality. And, there's something unspokenly therapeutic about working with clay. It's just like heavy and like you can, really just get your physical pent up energy out of it. And I didn't have that. And I didn't have, the expressive component either. So that's actually what started getting me into collage is I would literally dig in garbage cans at truck stops and like rest stops and things like that to get ephemera. And I would cut it out and I would budget myself a glue stick a week. And I would just like sit in my truck on my lap working on stuff. Or sometimes I'd go like next to the river and, like lean against a tree and I would just be making work because I just needed to keep my hands busy. But that ultimately wasn't enough. I got real close one night to killing myself. Like I decided what I was going to do. I was about to go do it. And I ended up calling my dad and I was like, "Hey Dad, I think I'm about to kill myself." And he was like, "You should come home." And I was like, "Okay." Like it was literally that paternal of a response for like, no, instead of killing yourself, like just come home. I was like, "Yes, Dad." And so I drove 3 hours and I just drove home. And at that point I moved back in with my folks, because it was just not safe for me to be alone anymore. And I couldn't see my kids at that point because of legal stuff. And I literally wasn't going to survive being alone any longer.
Did they know your situation at the time?
They knew that stuff wasn't good at home. They didn't know I was homeless and they didn't know the severity of it. But like that night or the next morning, I basically came and I fell asleep. And then the next morning I kind of told them everything. And they're like, "Great, just stay here. Like, you're fine. Just be right here." So they eventually learned what was going on. And I think the interesting thing about whenever you go through something that you think is intensely personal and private, people eventually are like, "Oh, we knew something's been weird." Like they're seeing stuff, that's almost scarier because you're like, "Oh, you knew these things were going on in this relationship," and they had fears about certain things. And, but at the same time, it's like, "Hey, it's not my business. I don't want to get involved." But it was interesting. I mean, in my 30s, I moved back in with my folks and then I took my life at that point.
Divorce is hard, and divorce with children is even harder. And you had 4 kids, man. So I can't even imagine. I mean, no matter how you cut it, divorce is rough. And speaking from personal experience, I can say that time in my life was probably the worst time in my life and one of the most difficult. And I was not at my best for sure. But you were able to see yourself through it by continuing to make things. And I think that is incredible. Like, it's making things is therapeutic, right? It's therapy. And we've talked to many artists that, have struggled during different times of their lives, whether it's with physical pain or some kind of mental thing that they have going on, whatever the circumstances may be. And art is that thing that got them through it.
I think that's the part that is deeply human about art making. I ironically or otherwise, I don't know, again, making all the connections that are connectable. As I was leaving work today, I mentioned to a friend, I'm like, "Hey, by the way, I got to leave a little bit. I can't hang out much after work today because I got to go to this podcast." You know how it is, and he was like, "I just got 2 things I got to tell you real quick." And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And he's been playing with some old photography equipment recently. Like he has an old Holga that he just got some film that he did with. And I'm like, I can't imagine how gross and wonderful those pictures are going to be. And he goes, so he's like launching a clothing company with a friend of his or something. And he's like, "Yeah, I keep telling him like, we don't want to do like low level arts and craft stuff. We want to like elevate everything." And I was like, "Yeah, I feel the exact opposite way. I want to pull everything back. Like I love doing gallery shows and I love art museums, but there's just something deeply human about making, and I don't want it alienating at all. Like people have been making work for a long time before people called art. Like, we were making stuff, and we have to be. And I think some of us can't exist without it. I think that there's just something inside of certain people that you have to be making work. You have to be creating something. And maybe it's because of some kind of character flaw. Maybe there's something in us that's like, I have things that I'm working out and I can't work them out in my head. Like, I have to work them out with objects somehow. I can't remember who it is. One of the Russian avant-garde said something like, forget museums and forget galleries. Like, we need children's toys and wallpaper. And I'm like, yeah, like I get it. There's just something about the approachability of it. And as much as I hated that period of my life, it actually really was a blessing, because it granted me that perspective where I'm like, no, like in literally the bottom of the barrel, rock bottom, like nowhere else left to go time of my life, I was making. And the making is what got me through it. Even after I moved in with my folks, I mean, that's kind of what built me back up.
So this catalyst with collage really happens when you're homeless and you just need to be making things. You've already seen what the other part of the art world looks like. You've had successes. You went to university and got a degree in art. You're doing all the right things, trying to support your family, and the wheels, fall off the bus. Collage saves your life, and then you're now on this path with collage. Why collage? Just because it was accessible at the time and it was easy to accumulate objects. Like you said, you could dig through trash cans or, find stuff on the ground, whatever, and make something of it.
What I like about thinking back on these times is that there was an immediate cause. And that immediate cause is like, yeah, I got to keep my hands busy, literally. And the only thing I can find is trash and whatever. But I really don't believe that those are the only reasons. There's something beautifully poetic about the idea of digging through the trash, reclaiming something, and then modifying it in a way that makes it valuable. I mean, that's what I was trying to do with my own life. I was trying to reclaim myself and find value again in me, in life, and then I think the other part of it was when I was living with my folks, I still felt really alone. My parents loved me, and I am forever indebted to their absolute unconditional love that they gave me at that time. I literally told them everything. I told them the stuff that was my choices and the bad decisions I made. I told them the stuff that was being done to me by other people's bad decisions. And they were like, great, you're still welcome in our home and you whatever you need, but it's different, like I was alienated from my kids and I was alienated from my job. I could never really be, especially at that time, I couldn't have gone back to teaching. I wouldn't have been an effective teacher. So I ended up quitting my teaching position, and I was alone. There were certain people that I had that were friends that we developed sort of during our marriage, and they either chose to take sides or chose to not take sides and kind of separate themselves. And all of those choices were fine. They made the choices they needed to make for their families, but the bottom fell out. I just didn't have a community or an identity any longer. But I'd been making stickers, and I started trading stickers with people, and all my stickers were crap. Like I just drew crappy little pies on priority postal mail labels because they were free that I stole from the post office. And then I would send them to people who would send me these beautiful glossy vinyl stickers. And I always felt guilty, but I was collaging at the same time. So I was like, hey, in addition to my bad stickers, how about a bad collage on the envelope? And it was just my second prize kind of thing. Hey, consolation for, you taking my work. But I found out that people loved it. People really enjoyed getting those physical objects, not just the stickers that I made, but they liked the collages that I was doing more. And people kind of in the community started talking more about that. Oh, that's the guy that does collages or whatever. If you look back on some of my old stuff, it's embarrassing, but it's also kind of oh man, that is the work that I was making. When I was living with my folks, it is raw and it's there. And I was using bingo dabbers to decorate, and like all kinds of anything and everything was go. And what I started realizing with it is what I was attracted to about collage is the same thing that I was attracted to about people who were doing sticker art, is that there was this conglomeration of imagery and text and texture and color. So like when you slap a sticker to the back of a electrical box that's rusty, and maybe there's like a lost dog poster on it and stuff, like it becomes these microcosms of community. And it's like, in my search for community, I was realizing what objects a community makes almost like incidentally just by existing. And I was making that same kind of work in my own collages, where I was just like smashing everything down into these experiences.
So it's almost like you came full circle, right? Like you were at the top of your game at one point, and you come back down and then kind of start over in this whole other medium. And not unlike your student that you were mentoring, right? That had struggled and was trying to make good work. You kind of had to start at that point too, and do the work until you got where you are today. I want you to talk about the whole idea with this pie idea, because I think that's an interesting story, and we didn't talk about it, but that comes from your teaching experience, correct?
Yeah. So when I was into Beck still, and I was really kind of right on the precipice of stopping giving projects, but giving, inspirational jumping points, I gave an assignment to give meaning to an object by repetition. And so I taught the kids different techniques, but then they could do anything they wanted. So it's like, hey, here's how you do a block print. Let's all do a block print together just as learning and experience. Also, here's how I can do some stencil work. Here's multi-piece stencils. And then, okay, if you want to do a stencil or block print, great. But if you want to do something else, you have to make multiple copies. So the challenge that I gave them was, over the course of the next 3 weeks, you have to make 100 copies of something. But the idea was that, look, as artists, we have the power to instill meaning, or at least make people pay attention to things that have meaning. And one of my students was like, no, we don't. You can't just tell people to look at something and they look at something. And I'm like, no, you literally can. That's what artists do all the time. And so one of my students said, yeah, prove it. When I had my own studio practice, when I was living in Aurora, I was messing around with cardboard one day, and I drew a picture of a piece of pie, and it looked angry. Just something about the drawing, it almost looked like it had a face, and I was like, oh, that's funny. So I stuck it up on my corkboard, and it was there for years, and it was all gross and splattered in glaze and stuff. And then when I shifted to teaching, I brought it into my, literally I brought my professional studio practice into my academic studio. I mean, I brought all my own ephemera into it and was like, no, this is my workspace too. And so the kids were like, prove it. And I was like, oh, fine. And I see this stupid pie drawing that's on my wall. I'm like, great. And I popped that off the wall and I said, in 6 weeks, everybody's going to be talking about this piece of pie. They're like, all right, great. So again, I gave myself a ton of work in this process, because as a teacher, then you can't just call some kids bluff. It becomes a problem. You got to be like, all right, let's really make this thing happen. So I start doing my own academic research, and I'm like, look, you want to go? I'm going to take you part of my journey. I'm going to show you what I'm doing in this process, and you guys have to join me. So I'm like, here's what I'm reading. Here's what I'm looking at. Here's what I'm paying attention to. And now you have to pay attention to it too, because I'm your teacher and I'm making you, but I'm also an artist, and this is what the whole point of it is. So Shepard Fairey, all contemporary artists owe something to him to some degree. He's the continuation of pop art in a totally new world. Whatever is going to end up happening with his Obama hope thing and what we're allowed to do with appropriating imagery, that's going to change the face of art forever, and how much we can get sued for stuff for taking images from photographs and everything. And but his work changed the face of art making in America. So it made sense that I looked at his work. And I remember asking my class, I'm like, so who knows who Shepard Fairey is? And others like, I have no idea. Some stupid artist that nobody's paying attention to. There's a kid literally right in front of me wearing an Obey Giant shirt. And I'm like, you know exactly who he is. Like, you're wearing his shirt right now. And he's like, what are you talking about? I don't know, And so, the Obey Giant campaign is amazing. It started with some punk kid putting up wheat paste and stickers illegally. And he has a great book about the Obey Giant campaign. And he actually has one of the first stickers ever on it that his roommate had used to write a note about how he brought a burrito from work for him or whatever. And he's like, that's how worthless my stuff was. It just became like scrap paper to this, to my roommate. And now I think people will probably pay thousands of dollars for that object, But super smart guy. In 1999, he wrote this thing called the Obey Manifesto. And the first sentence is, the Obey Giant campaign is an experiment in phenomenology. And he starts quoting Heidegger and all this stuff. And you're like, man, I have a degree in philosophy and I'm barely keeping up with this guy. I'm like, this is intense work. And he points out some super interesting observations. Some of it is about the conspicuous consumptive nature of things. We're so used to being told what to do. Buy Coke. Great. I'll buy some Coke. Easy. That when we're given a message that we don't have an explicit call to action on, we don't know what to do. And it freaks us out. Obey. Obey what? Give me more. I'll do whatever you want, but just, you got to tell me. But the fact that you're not being told is what makes it so compelling. Not anything new. Burma Shave was doing it, right? You would watch all these consecutive things are in 6 weeks, here it comes. What comes in 6 weeks? Everybody's paying attention to what happens in 6 weeks. The carnival, great, who cares? But up until then, man, are you talking about what's happening in 6 weeks? And then he talks about how people also want to be part of the underculture. When you're not allowed to do stuff, you kind of want to latch onto it. So the kid who's wearing the Obey Giant campaign or the Obey, shirt, he's latching on to the hoodlum nature of Shepard Fairey in the 90s. Even though he never put up anything in his life, but he bought a shirt at, wherever. So I show this to the kids. There is a documentary called Everywhere by the Toaster Crew that I am in love with. It's 20 minutes long, and those guys are smarter than I'll ever be in my entire life. And they just slavishly repeat an image and put it everywhere and put it on national TV. And it's just to the point where people just start recognizing it. And it means something to them, whether they mean for it to mean anything or not. And so I take all of these things and I start internalizing them in my own art practice. I start putting the pie on my own hello, my name is labels and sticking around town a little bit. But also on my syllabus that I sent home. Or, hey, parents, we're going to be doing a project on Greeks recently in the near future. Sometimes sculptures are naked, just so you know. And there'd be a little pie in the bottom corner. And I would go to my students' basketball games, and I would just hold up cardboard with a drawing of a pie. And everybody eventually is like, what's going on? What is this pie? Other students who are not even my students are asking. Parents are asking. And my answer all the time is, I don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea what you're talking about. And so I've been doing this, and it was really a way for me to get a hook in the kids. So that first group of kids, they knew everything. They were there from the beginning of it. But I kept using that in subsequent semesters, and even when I went to Parachute. And really the sort of tasty hook that I had dropped to these kids, which was so stupid, is people would be like, what's with this pie? Because from the beginning. Or oh, last semester I heard all this stuff. Or are you the guy? And you're like, nope. If you took my AP art class, then I would tell you the secret. But up until then, you didn't know. Nobody knew. And the secret is there's no secret, right? It's just some dumb little thing that I used to draw. But again, going back to this idea that there's always something more going on than what we think. There was the efficientness of that where I just needed to impress these kids and show them hey, look, I do know what I'm talking about. You can make people pay attention. Only later, when I started explaining this to people, did I realize okay, well, yeah. And I forgot about the pie drawing that I did. So that was something I later was oh, right, I did do that pie drawing. That's why I started. But I'm why did I do that pie drawing? That's a weird thing to draw. Why would you draw a piece of pie? And years later, I was reminded of this book called No Such Things. It's by this guy named Bill Pete, who did a bunch of different books in the 80s, like Some Dragon That Likes Muffins and like all kinds of stuff. And they're really cute books. And there's this one book called No Such Things. And there's these creatures. All of them are just silly little creatures. But there's one of them called the pie-billed Pazeeks that look exactly like this pie drawing that I did, like as an adult. And I didn't know it. I was so ingrained in my head that basically the thing I'm trying to teach my students about, like, yeah, imagery gets stuck in your head, whether you like it or not, like happened to me. It's like I was part of some other continuum of pie, but the pie I kind of had been doing in my art or my teaching and art practice for a little while. I eventually was like, look, that's kind of my handle now. I've been sticking it up places. And if I'm going to be trading stickers, it only makes sense that that's what I'm going to be doing. And now that I've been making the pie, I don't know, 2013 is probably when I started. I've drawn it 10, 20, 30,000 times. I now do collaborations with people. I now get nice slick vinyl stickers made. Every Halloween, if you come to my house, I think you can expect one of the things that's going to go in your treat bag. I do custom buttons every year. Like, it's something that has become part of my identity. And one of the things, and I'll preemptively ask the question, people are like, well, you must really like pie. Like, what's your favorite kind of pie or whatever? I'm always like, I honestly don't that much. Like, it's not like I'm super into pie. It's just that, now it's my life. But the funny thing is, now I do. Now I love pie. Like, I don't do birthday cakes anymore. I do birthday pie. Like, it's this thing where I'm like, it only makes sense that I have to like tie back into the thing that I've been telling people to pay attention to for a long time.
I think that's beautiful, man. And Brilliant. I think, yeah, and I think Shepard Fairey kind of gets looked down upon as being kind of a hack or sellout or whatever, but it's actually really genius, right?
I think he's brilliant.
Well, and the other thing is he put in work. I don't think it's called selling out if you made work for 20 years before somebody paid you.
Yeah.
Well, and if you're cashing big checks, who gives a shit, right?
Oh, yeah, more power to them.
Most people that are complaining about him probably aren't making the money that Shepard Fairey is making. So More power to him.
I love art appropriation, by the way. I'm just trying to, and Todd's heard me talk about this about a gazillion times. So, and our listeners, but I think it's interesting how far you can go in appropriation without getting hammered. And then every now and then somebody will hammer you. So,
well, and they only hammer you when you can pay the fee. Nobody cares if you're a nobody, right?
Well, that's true.
I can go steal anything I want right now. Nobody gives a crap. But true. Once I make my first million, then people will start talking about it. Though, and this is a funny thing. The same guy who's talking about, his photography before the podcast tonight is he and I were talking about the fact that on my way into work today, I was thinking about, our conversation that we were going to have tonight. And one of the things about appropriation that I find so amazing is that it's deeply ingrained in our culture right now. The hallmark of appropriation is TikTok. I'm going to take somebody else's sound clip that I didn't make, and I'm not even singing the song. I'm just lip syncing through to it for 10 seconds. And I'm going to call that my own work. And there's something legitimate about it. And the thing that's great, and this is what I love, is that it actually, it's like the opposite of a joke, right? First time you hear a joke, you're like, oh, that's funny. And then you hear somebody else tell it, and you're like, yeah, okay. And then the third time you hear the joke, you're like, great, literally not funny anymore. With appropriation, and especially like with what TikTok is doing, it becomes increasingly relevant. Like, oh, somebody stole it, and then somebody stole what they stole, and then somebody stole that. Like, the more layers you pile onto it, it becomes the stickers in the street on the electrical box. I mean, that's the digital version of that, where it's like, no, I have something to say about that too. And so like here I'm putting my piece on it as well. That's what I find amazing. And, anybody who's like appropriation is not art. I don't know what generation you're from, but that's where we're living, man.
Well, and great painters appropriated other people's work all the time. They copied it, or at least copied the idea of Olympia, right? From Matisse to Picasso to whoever. It's the same painting. It's just painted in a different style. So it's still appropriation. They're just kind of like, I like what you're doing here, and now here's my twist on it. And I love the TikTok thing, which is interesting, is like how the Hispanic man on the skateboard, when he played Fleetwood Mac's Dreams, it became a phenomenon. And then I see like there's a couple ladies that sign on TikTok, and they use Eminem's song. And then after a few months, the sound was taken away because I'm sure Eminem's lawyer said you can't play that. So it's just interesting what people will encourage. Like Fleetwood Mac, they don't care. Yeah, play that song. It just made my hit from the 70s #1 again, or whatever, or top 10.
Oh yeah.
So, but yeah. So I kind of get a kick out of looking at what people are doing with appropriation. And I think, and I don't know if Todd and I have talked about your art before, but I've seen your pies, and I don't know where, but I was looking on your Instagram page, and I'm like, I've seen flavors of this, flavors of these somewhere. I can't tell you where, but I've seen them. So either out in Denver or wherever, Colorado, or maybe Todd and I have talked about it months ago or something. But yeah, I love the pies. I think that's brilliant.
Thanks. The funny thing that I love that it's out of my control to some degree now. So the pie thing, when I was teaching, I had students that started taking it up, so they would start putting it on. It sort of broke my heart in the most beautiful way. I have a couple of students that I do still keep contact with, thankfully. And one of them was recently showing me some stuff that she worked on, and there was a little drawing of a pie in the corner of it. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, it's still running strong. And, she wasn't my student, like 5 years ago. It's like, it's so amazing to see it. But then the other thing is when you start sending work out, because I'll send sticker packs all over the world. That when I was living with my folks, I was there for about 9 months, and I sent out like 400 sticker packs, because that was like the only thing that I was doing just all day long. There's just like this, like, it's the way I stayed alive and stayed connected. It's really neat to go somewhere and know that you didn't put one up. And I've been to other states, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know where that one came from. Like, it's kind of a cool experience for sure. So.
New Magazine is our media sponsor for the Tenet podcast. That's NUE. You can follow both the national and the Denver edition of New Magazine on Instagram. The national edition can be found at new_magazine, and the Denver edition at new_Denver_magazine. Look to New for compelling stories from the world of art and fashion. Thanks for listening. I read and I saw when I listened to that talk that you gave down at the Bridge Project, that art for you is all about connection. It's about connecting with other people. Speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. So obviously there's that, the narrative, me kind of my rebirth and the connections and all that happened. But I think art has always been that for me. And I think that that's also why I'm now drawn to collage so much. And really, in some ways, it's the same reason that I was drawn to ceramics, but the opposite side of it. So you can go to Jerusalem and you can see pottery that's like 10,000 years old, and you can see people's fingerprints in it. And like, that's breathtaking and heartbreaking, because you're like, oh man, like, there's nothing more intimate. Like, you could put your hand exactly where their hand was, crossing time and space, and it rehumanizes people. We have this tendency, especially with, bygone cultures or whatever, where it's like, oh, let me tell you about, the Minoans or something like that. And like, cool. Well, tell me about Todd, tell me about Wes. Like, I don't care about the Minoans. It's like, tell me about the Coloradans from, the mid 2000s. It's like, who cares? Like, that's just meaningless. I want a connection with a human being doing human stuff. I think that's why Pompeii is so amazing to us, because we're like, oh, people held each other when they died. Like, people were eating food and like going to the bathroom and stuff. And it's like, they're human beings doing human stuff. It's not like going to somebody's tomb, which is also deeply human, but it's like curated, but it's like, I want the non-curated part of humanity. And so for ceramics, it's like, ooh, I can reach out through time and space and I can touch tens of thousands of years. You know, maybe somebody's going to hold one of my mugs 10,000 years from now. Like, how amazing is that? Collage is like the other side of that. A friend of mine was like, I said, oh, did you know that you can like put salt on a Polaroid and like it starts, you know, like degrading the chemicals and stuff? And he's like, yeah, but that's not going to like survive. I'm like, I know, isn't that great? Like it's going to be gone. But it's like capturing this moment. And so the moments of humanity is what I'm so interested in now. So there's a moment of humanity in the fingerprint in a piece of ceramic. There's a moment of humanity in, you know, last week's King Soopers ad. Like there's something deeply just beautiful and mundane. And then taking those things and reminding people like, ooh, this is what humanity is like when we smash all this stuff together, when you pay attention to the half sodden lost dog poster, that's somebody's lost dog and they made that and like they're sad. And, you know, like that's what's so interesting. So there's a level of connection that happens in a communicative way. So I stick a sticker on the back of the stop sign and you see it. And then you're like, oh, there's somebody else doing stickers. Yeah. Well, how about this? And you put, you know, a waffle up or like whatever it is that you're into. And then I see that. I'm like, oh yeah. And then I do a waffle pie and I throw that up and, you know, like, and then there's this conversation that ends up happening in the street. We've never met. We may never meet. We don't know who each other is, but we're talking. Even the police, when they come and like paint over your stuff, like that's a part of the conversation too, you know? But then the conversation is also, oh yeah, there's the lost dog guy too. He's also my neighbor. And there's the electrical guy who has to fix like the phone lines and, you know, like all of this is life and is what's happening. And when I get to do collage stuff, most of my work I send in the mail. And there's something so weird about the dialectic that we've gotten to in life where we can have perfect anything now. You know, you want a perfect, beautiful piece of art to put on your wall. Cool. You can order it from Redbubble or something. And some guy took a great photograph. You probably get a really nice print of it for like $30 and you stick it on your wall. It's prettier than anything I've ever made. But who cares, right? Nobody cares about that. I can go to Target right now and get some really nice stuff that's completely meaningless to me. Like I want something raw, I want something personal, I want something real. There's a physicality that we absolutely adore. I want to be able to smell old paper. And I want to get something in the mail that somebody belabored and was fastidiously cutting out a piece of rope out of an old 1920s magazine. Because I know that they touched it for a long time and then I'm going to touch it. And there's something so salvific about that. There's something so real. And we're all deeply alienated. That's the part that I realized, you know, in my time of coming back to my folks and living with my folks, is that I wasn't the only one. I was alienated for my own reasons, but we all have alienation. And we're all desperate to be reaching out and touching. So to again, sort of full circle, going back to gallery spaces, I don't want to lose that. I don't want somebody to ever see my piece behind glass like the Mona Lisa. I would hate that. Like I want them to be able to come up to it and like interact with it and apply their own phenomenological experience to it as well and finish the piece in some way that I started.
Have that connection with that viewer, whether you know it or not. They've had that experience of, you know, a Joey Kerlin collage.
Yeah, I mean, if you ever want to see my work, don't be prepared for answers because you're not getting any. I'm going to make you put in some of the hard work too.
Well, let's talk about that because when we had our initial conversation, we talked about collage as being kind of like the thing these days. There's a lot of people doing it. What I like about your collage is I think it's really, really well done, but I see a lot of stuff that doesn't speak to me, and I don't think is all that well done. And I'm not trying to be a snob. I just think that it's, and you put it in perspective, it's accessible to anybody, right? So how do you make something that means something?
Yeah, that's a real good point. So the first thing I'll say is I completely agree. And I don't think it's snobbish to be like, this stuff's boring. You know, part of the reason it's boring is because people aren't investing themselves. I think you can tell when somebody's invested work. And that's not the only hallmark. I mean, I'm not saying you put in 10 hours and that's 10 times as good as 1 hour or anything like that. But some of the work that you invest, just like my student, right? You invest the work over time. The lecture, that's so very sweet of you to say that you liked it, by the way. I appreciate that. I was picking a friend of mine up because she needed a ride, and she's like, "Yeah, I'd love to go to the lecture, but like, give me a ride." And I was like, "Yeah, sure." She said, "So how do you feel? Are you nervous?" And I was like, "Well, I haven't prepared at all." And she was like, "Oh, isn't it in like 10 minutes?" I'm like, "Yeah." In fact, I was late, but they didn't start without me, thankfully. So it was great. It went really well. I felt like it was pretty fluid. A lady cried at one point, which was kind of cool. And it's not because I was picking on her. And it was like this really nice, intimate conversation with, maybe a dozen of us or something. And afterward, my friend was like, "You said you didn't prepare." And I was like, "Well, I've been preparing for 5 years. I'm just telling you about the work that I'm doing. There is no preparing for a talk about like, tell me the last 5 years of your life." It's like, I lived it, So anyway, that being said, I think most people just they're not doing the work in themselves to make their work interesting. And I think there's a major pitfall. I have a friend of mine who is not academically trained in art at all. And he's recently been looking at some work that he found really compelling from some contemporary artists who are often likened to some of the surrealists. And he's like, "Oh boy, I hate surrealist art so much." He's like, "Dali's a jerk, and like I can't believe like this work." And I was like, "What are you talking?" Like, it was such a wild experience because people are usually like, "Oh, surrealism is so fun," and I kind of agree with what he's saying, which is like anybody can make something weird, like that's not that hard. To make something uncanny, like that's where you start getting something interesting. And I think that that's the same divide for collage. There's a strong propensity to make surrealistic work, because it's very easy to like stick a head of one thing on another thing. And you're like, "Ooh, look, that's kooky." But for one to do it in a sophisticated way requires nuance. And most people are not very nuanced in their collage. And then I think you go through these phases when you start dealing with collage ephemera. The first one is just like, okay, what's accessible to me outright? Magazines are hyper accessible. Advertisements are hyper accessible. But that really limits your palette. It's like, okay, great. Here's a bunch of celebrities and, fashion and stuff like that. It's like, there's something there and people do some good work with it, but I want something more. And I think part of what's reaching out and the necessary connection part is that you need to get past that. And you need to start like really pushing some boundaries of what's acceptable. That's when you start like cutting up books, which, is kind of taboo a little bit. But that's also when you start finding like weird depositories of things that just aren't as recognizable. And when you take away the easiness of the recognizability, that's when you start challenging more. And one of the things that I think a lot of contemporary collage artists fall into is you inundate the viewer with too much visual noise to the point where they can't explore the beauty and the intrigue of the individual objects. And that's where it just becomes like, and it's just easy to just dismiss it because you're like, yeah, it's old stuff. And like in the 50s, they had funny advertisements about toasters or something. Like, yeah, like who cares? I think that's really one of the things that ends up happening. The sort of the next stage that happens is you start really reverencing the materiality, like the yellowing paper and the torn edges and things like that. And it becomes much more formal then. And so I think everybody has to go through phases. And unfortunately, I think most people just stop. Like you get to a certain point where you're like, this is kind of fun and playful. And you don't want to lose that, but they never get to the point of being like serious. And you can be fun and serious. And I think people just don't get.
You have to train yourself, right?
Sure.
Like you start with like a collage that, like you were saying, like it's just full of all these different elements. And then you start at some point, you probably start to distill it down because that's what I see with your work. It's very clean, very, you might not get exactly what's going on, but if you spend a little time with it, you'll start to see stuff. You'll get the inside joke, or you'll get the, what was kind of going on at least a little bit. And then it'll speak to you in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And this goes back to the making the viewer do some of the work. Because if I'm like, hey, look, what if there was a picnic, but it's in space? They're like, yep, I got it. Like, cool. That's it. Like, I don't have any work to do. But instead it's like, oh man, there's a great conversation out of a lady about one of the pieces that I had on display at Bridge Project. And she was like, what is in that glass? And I was like, that's a great question. And I walked away. And I was like, I'm not going to tell you what's in the glass. And partly, I don't know. Like, it's not like you tell me, but it's like, that is weird, huh? Like, there's something there for sure. And some of it is like, I don't even remember where I got some of my images from. So like, I can't even tell you the answer if I wanted to, but the other thing is like, why would I want to? That's part of why that piece is interesting.
So I got a couple questions. The first one that came early on when I was looking at your stuff and knowing that you had a degree in philosophy. How much does philosophy and your experience with it in academia play into your collage work?
100%. So the reason I have a degree in philosophy is because I found that my art was more interesting every semester that I took a philosophy course. So from the very beginning, I knew like, yep, this is what we got to do. And this is the work that I'm making. I think the other part of it is that if I asked you if you were a philosopher or an artist or a mathematician or a theologian or whatever before the 18th century, you would be like, I don't understand what you're asking me. Like, I just do stuff and I think about stuff and like, sure. And so I think that's part of it is it's a continuum. There is no question in my mind that I select the imagery that I select for a reason. And the reason why there's no question in my mind is because I selected it, right? I know all of the stuff that's available to me, and I know stuff that I don't select, and I know stuff that I do select. And it might not be entirely conscious. I might not be like, ooh, a snake, I'm going to choose that instead of a bird today or something like that. But there's a reason, because I did. And the funny thing is, because of the traumatic past that I had, I'm still doing a lot of therapeutic work. And I just recently did a assessment with my therapist. The premise of the test is there's 8 boxes and there's some kind of linear or figurative element inside of them. So there's a dot and a square and 2 wiggly lines and whatever. And then you're supposed to finish the picture, right? You can do anything you want and there's no direction. It's not like, ooh, tell me this is when you're sad or whatever. It's literally just finish. Now, as it turns out, each one of those boxes is tied to something. So it's ooh, this is your relationship with women. And I'm like, oh, they're tied to a dragon. That makes sense. And so now going back through them, I'm like, oh, very interesting. I do see that. And that makes sense. And there's one where there's 2 lines that are perpendicular, but they're not quite touching. And I remember verbally saying, wow, there's a lot of conflict in those 2 lines. And then made some stuff, whatever. Weeks later, my psychologist goes through it and she scores it and everything. And she goes, okay, this is the box about conflict. And I was like, of course it is. I didn't know that, I'm not a background in psychology or whatever. But as an artist, I was like, oh, there's clearly conflict in these lines because they're about to touch, but they're not touching. And it was that makes sense to me. So anyway, I'm both interested and terrified at the idea of my psychologist looking at my art because, how much of that, she's like, oh my gosh, the back of a chair and a snake. What does that mean? Anyway, so that being said, philosophically, absolutely. One of my pieces that was in the show recently is one of the source images of it is one of the sculptures that's in London of Karl Marx, but his face is sort of obscured in the way that I've done the collage. And the title of my piece is this very obscure reference to one of his early works when he was still funny. So there's these things that tie in all the time. I title all my pieces, and the titles of my pieces very frequently, that's when I start really delving into more philosophical leanings or whatever. But there's definitely no question that my philosophy informs my art. And in the very purest sense, my philosophy informs my art making. When I reverence materiality, that's the Aristotelian forms that are starting to come forth in my work or whatever. And, I don't pretend like I don't do those things consciously, but I know that my philosophy influences my work beyond what's conscious.
In your talk, you state that you believe that collage is at the forefront of contemporary art. Why is that?
So the background of it is, academically speaking, and this is true both in teaching art and also in art theory and criticism, we're trained to look at art. So I'm an academic in a lot of ways, not just because I was an educator, but I think my disposition is a very academic disposition. I like the idea that we have to pull away from the emotive of art. Like, one of the worst things you can do is like, ooh, I like this. You're like, yeah. Like, I don't care. You're like, tell me what's going on in this piece. Because there's lots of things I like and lots of things I don't like. And that doesn't mean they're important or not important just because I don't like them or do like them. So academically, we have to come up with some kind of grounds to dissect a piece of work in an objective way. And I fully believe that that's a benefit to art and to society to do that. The way that we've chosen to do that historically has been through the elements and the principles of art. So the elements of art, everybody should be pretty familiar with: line, color, texture, form. It all makes sense, right? That's what it's made out of. So just like we have the elements, okay, well, this table is made out of carbon and steel and, iron and whatever, right? It's the fundamental building blocks of it. The first problem that you run into, though, when you start doing those things is that we pretend like we have any idea what any of them mean, right? So like, if I said, okay, what's a line? Like, can you really give me a definition of what a line is? That's hard. Like maybe in math gets sort of close where it's like the continuation of the series of points between two, like whatever, right? One of my favorite definitions is Paul Klee. He said a dot or a line is a dot that takes a walk. And that's what I used to teach my students. So like, it's good enough, right? And it's probably better than the mathematical one. My favorite though is color. I know exactly what color is, and I couldn't tell you what color is. I can give you some examples. And a really good like practice is like, okay, imagine that you're explaining color to a blind person. Like, well, it's warm. Like, no, it's not. Like, well, yeah, but it looks warm, And then a lot of people like to make the move of like, well, color is like wavelengths of light bouncing off of stuff and whatever. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's absolutely not that. And the reason why it's not that is, right now we're looking at each other through a Zoom call on a screen, and our screens are only capable of projecting 3 colors. And I see more than 3 colors right now, right? So Wes, your end of your microphone is yellow, right?
Yeah.
If I zoomed in enough, it would be little pixels of red and green. So am I seeing red and green? No, man, that's yellow. Like there's 100% that's yellow, right? Because, and not to get too far into philosophy, I think colors exist in the mind. There's stimulus of light. Yes, there's lots of science behind it. But the reality is like, I don't know what a definition of color is. Plato's definition of a color is the edges of a shape, which is super weird, but also like, I kind of get it, right? Anyway, so that's the elements of art, which your starting basis is, I already don't know what any of those things are, but fine. At least we can sort of pretend like we do. Texture, well, it looks like it could be touched. And if I touched it, I could feel it. Like that's weird too, right? But fine, okay. And that's all just the rudiments. Because you know what else line and color and texture makes? Everything. Like my dog has line and color and texture, and he's not a piece of art, So then you have to have something else. So we have the principles of art. Well, any designers who might be listening, you're familiar with the principles of design as well. And those are a little more hard-hitting. But the principles of art are similar. Balance, repetition, harmony, unity, variety. And that makes sense, right? Like now we're really starting to get to a point where like, okay, if I just have a blank canvas, is that a piece of art? Well, we can argue that, but let's pretend no, right? There's nothing on it. So now if I put one dot on it, that has a element of art. Was that a piece of art? Like, well, not really. Like, we still need something more. What if I put 3 dots? Well, now I've got repetition. There's unity because they're all dots. There could be variety. Maybe they're dots of different colors or different shapes. Like, this is where you start getting into the parts that you can really control and refine and be sophisticated about. The problem with those historical definitions of the principles of art is that they don't go anywhere, right? So my kindergartner can draw something, and then my AP studio art student could draw something, and they would both have elements and principles of art in them, and one of them could be garbage and the other one could be amazing, or they both be amazing, or both of them garbage. But like, there's something else that's making it there, and maybe the answer is like the synthesis of all of those things. We were talking a little bit about appropriation before, and how if you pretend like appropriation has nothing, no place in art making today, that you're not making art today, frankly. That's where I think collage really starts to shine. So there's this lady named Olivia Gude, who was art educator and an art theorist. She wrote this essay called The Postmodern Principles of Art. And in the Postmodern Principles of Art, she talks about, like, look, yeah. Here's the principles of art. Who cares? We've been talking about these things forever, but there's things that are happening in art making today that completely transcend those foundational to the art making of today. Appropriation, collaboration, destruction, time, text, layering, juxtaposition. One of the ones that she talks about is called representing, like with an apostrophe instead of a G. It's important, right? Because I don't want to look at a piece of art anymore, and maybe never, but especially not today, where it looks like anybody could have made it. I want to look at that piece of art and be like, oh, I know who made this. Or at least the same person who made this made that. Like, there should be something, because at the end of the day, and this is my proclivity toward connection, I'm more interested in people than I am the stuff that they make, but the stuff that they make teaches me about the people. And we do that through artifacts, and art is nothing more than an artifact of somebody making right now. So when you go down this list, appropriation. Okay, well, collage artists are literally just taking other people's stuff. Destruction. Well, first of all, we have to cut stuff out of stuff. And sometimes we do it, eloquently with beautiful little pairs of embroidery scissors. And sometimes we literally tear it out of things, but we're still absolutely destroying whatever its source is. Juxtaposition. We're literally taking something from one context and placing it into a new context. Text, both literal and implied, but very frequently are we putting actual printed copy onto our collages. Again, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, because it bleeds through the backside of a piece of paper. Representing, again, I'm choosing the image that I chose for a reason. I'm drawn to the ephemera that I chose for a reason. I have accessibility to the ephemera for a reason. I don't do cool Indonesian newspapers because I don't know where to buy those, right? Like, I get the stuff that's local to me and consumable to me in my culture in Denver, Colorado in 2021, that's at my thrift store and that's at my library and that I pick up from the street. Like, those are the things that show a part of who I am, because that's the life that I'm living and the stuff that I interact with. So collage is absolutely all of these things just jam-packed into one hyper accessible media that any person, whether they have an art historical background or not, is capable of touching.
I love that, man. I love how you put that in perspective. So what is your process? Because if you look at your Instagram, and actually take a moment and tell people where they can find you, because you don't have a website, but you have an Instagram. So tell our listeners your Instagram.
So my primary place that my work can be found is on Instagram at Radius Studios, all one word. It's the small co-op that I help run. And Radius Studios, was really born out of this time of my life anyway. So it's where I'm doing collaborative work through, and that's kind of the online presence that I have right now. Looking at that is, if anybody wants a real adventure, if you want to be browsing through my Instagram while you listen to this podcast, you'll get to see some of the harrowing experiences that I've talked about. You get to see one of the first pies that my dad ever saw, which was when we were throwing a mattress away. I like spray painted it when we threw it on the curb. And he was like, "Oh, you're the pie, huh?" And he was like so dad about it. It was great. But yeah, so feel free to reach out to me there. If you're ever interested in collaborating on some work or getting some stickers or trading or whatever, that would be the place to definitely hit me up. Process. I love that I've like fallen into the collage community because we're all a bunch of weirdos, but we're like real specific in how we're weirdos. There's like a little gang feud in the collage community of people who like to use X-Acto knives and people who like to use scissors. At some point in time, you're going to hit a place where you actually get a tattoo of one of those implements. And then like, that you're in. I'll just say I'm working on my scissor piece. It's on my calf right now. I'm not done yet. It's close. I am definitely of the scissor crew. And the way that people work, watching, like being in a room with other collage artists is the most anxiety inducing thing that you can ever do to yourself, because everybody has their own like weird little ways that they work. And like, you're disgusted by the choices that other people make. So I'm usually the one that disgusts people, as it turns out, because if you look at a lot of other really talented collage artists, you'll see them have like cute little bins or like drawers of like, here's all my animals that start with B, and here's like cars, and here's, women's legs and like whatever else. And I was like, oh, cool. See that room in the back of my house? That's where I have a pile of books. And then sometimes I'll tear pages out of them. Like, I don't prepare my collages at all. I don't have cute little bins that are set aside. I don't pre-cut like anything unless I accidentally didn't use it the day before. And so watching me work, I literally had people be like, I have to walk out of the room. Like, you're freaking me out because you're tearing people's faces in half that I would have loved to have that face. And I'm like, yeah. There's always more books. Like, I have a no golden calves kind of a rule where I'm like, everything's up for grabs. And if something gets messed up, like, then I wasn't meant to use it. But I'm very frenetic in my process, and I'm very intuitive as well. So a lot of people would be like, ooh, tell me about what this piece means. Or like, why did you decide to blah, blah, blah? I'm like, I don't know. I saw that and I thought it was cool. And then I tore that out and I thought they should go together. And that sounds very blasé. And there's clearly more going into it than that, but it's very much this like active making process. And so it's very hard for me to be like, okay, I'm going to make a piece. Like, I usually sit down and my desk is a mess. And like, you can see behind me right now, but like, I have my spirograph box because I was like using that recently. And like, there's some book that's hanging off the shelf over there that I tore out. Like, that's how I live my life. And I'm making work in it, for better or for worse. So like, literally, I just had to move like these two things off my desk. One of which is like something from like the Book of Kells, and then a note card that I wrote myself about how I don't have any more breath left in me. Like, I just had to move those to move my mouse because like I live in the ephemera, right? And so that's how I like to live, because it feels more responsive that way. And the intuitive nature, I think this is where, because I'm thinking all the time and because I'm always, my philosophical mind is constantly running about the way that things interconnect, and seeing how they interconnect becomes more like a place of discovery than it does of a place of creation. And I think that that's what's super important to me, is finding things that were meant to be rather than like forcing something into existence.
And nothing is so precious, right? Like, you were giving your talk down at the bridge and you had this book that you found in the thrift store that was written by this woman named Jenny. Talk a little bit about that. Like, and you're tearing pages out of it. It's this old book.
Yeah. So again, I think this is a process that everybody goes through, and the way that I deal with things, is deeply personal to some degree, but one of the things that I like is the process of discovery. So discovering the ephemera to begin with, right? You go to the thrift store and you're like, oh my gosh, this book is beautiful. I have this really cool book from the 40s that I found about like steam powered couplings or something. And it's like a manual, so like if I ever wanted to make a steam powered thing and I was smart enough, I would use this book. As it turns out, I don't, and I'm not. So I'm free to use it. But just looking at the book, you're like, oh man, it feels like it's from the 40s. Like you look at the way that it's bound and you look at the like kind of weird Art Nouveau style that the copy on the cover is, and you're like, oh man, like if I was in the 40s, I would be the coolest steam powered coupling guy ever having that book. But the one that you're talking about was a book about like algebra, and it's a primer, basically. It's a book that a student would use, and you go through it, and it's just like algebraic equations, and some of it, the language is a little archaic, but it's just math. But what's beautiful and charming about it is it's yellowed and it smells like an old book, and there's graphite handwritten equations throughout the entire thing. But there's also like inscriptions in it. So the reason why we know that it's Jenny's book is because she wrote her name in it. And she wrote the year that she bought the book, which was 1900. Like, that's amazing. And it's amazing that it's that long ago, right? Like, I'm touching this thing that has a history and that I know some of it. I know a little tiny taste of the history of this book. And I don't know who this person is really. They're not famous enough. If I Googled them and be like, cool, who's that? Nobody, right? But you eventually get to a point where you're like, this is deeply personal and deeply intimate. It pulls you out of your perspective of just being in the world today. And it reminds you of certain things. Like, for example, I bought the book at a thrift store for like $2 that nobody wants too, right? Like, this is part of what I love is like, I'll be in the thrift store and I'll like find it and I'm like, oh, I hope nobody sees this. And I like hoard it like Golem, like finding some kind of treasure. And they're like, what's that? And like, it's a book of math from 1900. And they're like, cool, man, you can have it. Like, I'm not trying to buy that book, right? Like, but I think that those are the parts that are so interesting because it's a singular object. That book exists somewhere else, but it wasn't Jenny's and she didn't put her name in it. She didn't write her transcription. There's a little part of the back where she writes like this little poem about like what's going to happen to you if you steal the book. And you're like, oh man, like what a cool, cute thing. Like, I don't know how old she was. Was she 10? Was she 20? I don't know. But also like books used to be more valuable, right? I mean, like somebody had to really save up for this book and that knowledge was important. And, nowadays it's like, this is a literal piece of garbage. The fact that I spent $2 for it is $2 more than anyone else would spend for this book. And that kind of connection that I make with people, some of them are dead that I'm connected with. And that I get to share Jenny's story with other people too. And sure enough, I'm just as aggressive with my frenetic making with that book as I am with anything else. In fact, it's easier because those pages are real easy to tear. So like I just pull them out and you get textures and you get those little bits and bobs. I did a whole series once of some yearbooks that had been filled out with people's signatures and like, salutations in the back and everything, and cutting all those out and then recontabulating those together to make backgrounds of collages. It was so amazing because you're like, ooh, wow. In the 40s, people had better handwriting than I do. And like, I bet Dorothy had the hots for this guy. And like, there's all this stuff that like no one's ever going to see before they wrote it. No one can ever see again. And I've destroyed it. I've ruined it. I mean, like that book doesn't exist any longer because I cut it apart and made a new thing out of it. And it's humbling to be part of those stories that I can't imagine any other way to be part of.
And you give them new life. You give birth to something new.
Yeah.
Those memories, those psychic imprints live on in a creation of art.
Yeah, so I talked before about how it's like, oh, I belabored over this thing for hours and hours of me cutting and gluing and finding stuff. But yeah, it's also imbued with whatever was done to it before I got it too. The 121 years since this book was first written in, what has happened to it? A lot, I'm sure. And probably some of it was 50 years sitting on the shelf, but that's no less real than anything else. When I went to Metro, my thesis for my BFA was all about the idea of relics. So like St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, there's a statue of St. Peter, and it's a bronze. And the toes of the statue have been kissed so many times that it's just like a nub and it's shiny. So there's no toes anymore on that foot. And I don't know how many lips that is, but I bet it's a lot. Like, I don't know how many lips it takes to like wear bronze down, and I kissed the piece too, I kissed the foot as well. And I'm like, oh man, like who else am I vicariously like making out with over like 1,000 years? Like it's probably important people. It's probably bad people, like that. There's something so interesting about that notion. But one of the things that I started thinking about was the reason it's worn away is because literally when you put your lips upon it, you're at least taking some molecule of bronze. So in a very real way, I'm taking a piece of that statue with me, and on a molecular level even. And how much am I influenced by that? And then how much is it influenced by me? Because 1,000 saints kiss a statue, is it a relic? Did they become saints because they kissed the statue? Like that's the exchange that I find so interesting. And so, in a very real way, when I'm touching these objects that have been touched 120 years ago by some lady named Jenny, is part of her literally still on that piece of paper? Like maybe. And there's something beautifully haunting about that.
That's really cool. Who inspires you as far as collages? I know that you referenced Ray Johnson, who I love that guy's work. And if you're not familiar with the work of Ray Johnson, there's a great documentary called How to Draw a Bunny, which is just phenomenal. And it'll hook you from the very beginning. Obviously he's an influence. Who else?
Yeah. The funny thing is there's a lot of people on Instagram right now that I look at their work and I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's work is 1,000 times better than I'll ever be. And I don't even know their names, right? Like their names are like Cut and Paste New Jersey or like whatever. And if you're interested, I'm happy to give you a list afterward that we can post or something too of some of those people. But I think the thing that I really like is the work that's being done in the thinking, more than just the media. And because I had my departure from ceramics, and I still love ceramics and it's still a part of my practice, I really am less tied to people who are working in a specific media and more just the thinking that's going on. So like Lewitt, 1,000% is somebody who inspired the kind of thinking that I do. If you've never read some of his personal letters, they're so good. And I would love to both write and receive letters that are of the power of like, and I can't remember the name of the letter, but literally he's like, make fucking work. Like that's what he says. And I'm just like, I love this letter. Like I want to write letters like that. And so the thing to me that's lovely about his thinking is that there's also so much process orientation and so much collaboration. So, like the idea of sending somebody a pencil to a gallery and a set of instructions, what a cool piece, It's like, okay, you're going to write a line that's 2 inches long, and then you're like another inch next to it, another line. And like eventually there's a piece on the wall. I really appreciate that. I think like in a similar vein, like the work that Fluxus was doing was super foundational. Just the kind of push and pull, Yoko Ono gets so much guff because of the Beatles, but they forget that she was making art before she was ever involved with them. Really amazing stuff that some of it is like cheesy, like go jump in every puddle in New York. Like, but there's something like charming about it too. You're like, you know what, that is nice. I would say in my own like making, the people that were really influential were a lot of graffiti artists. There's this guy named Buff Dis, who was doing like work with tape, like masking tape. It was beautiful, and he would put these installations in abandoned buildings that were really cool. And I think part of what drives me about a lot of the reverence and for the work that people are making is that there's a dedication. Like, I'm going to be ballsy enough to decide that this is what I'm doing, and that I'm going to tell people to pay attention to me putting up masking tape in an abandoned hospital. And that I do it with such conviction and such intensity and such passion and such dedication that you can't help but pay attention to it and then realize that it's beautiful. Like, that's the kind of stuff that I really love. Yeah, I wish I could give you more names, but like, it's more the kind of thing. I will say the Toaster Crew, 1000% is a foundation to the work that I'm doing now about the idea of the communication that happens. I talk about them probably once a week. I mean, like, the work that they've done has formed who I am as an artist.
I would like to take a piece and have you describe it and maybe the process of thinking about the piece. And sure. I just picked one. It's on your Instagram. It's not very far down. And you call it, I believe, On Occasion I Wander. And in the text on the piece itself, it says, the capacity of your lungs. And has a picture of a woman on a phone.
That was actually one of the pieces that was in the show that was up at the Bridge Project. So one of the best and worst things that ever happened to me is the day I picked up a sewing pattern and I realized that was a piece of ephemera that I never really played with. Sewing patterns are really interesting because they're super recognizable. I mean, when you see a sewing pattern, you're like, that's a sewing pattern. And if you've ever done any sewing, like, it just is what it is. It is a singular object, and it's so based in its own function. It's printed on the most jank, crappy paper that you can get. And the reason for it is because you actually sew it onto things sometimes. You know, like, you sew it into your garments, and then you can tear it away and it doesn't leave any bits and bobs. And it's also super cheap. It's super accessible. Even a brand new sewing pattern, you might spend $20 on. I mean, they're not expensive objects. You're basically buying the intellectual property more than anything else. Vintage sewing patterns, if you want to do sewing pattern work, like, you could drown in them. You know, I got mine at the thrift store, and I think they were like 80 cents for the expensive ones. You know, it's like they're, and one of them is as big as a dress. You know, it's like, they're huge. There is a language, a visual language that's built into sewing patterns that if you know about sewing, you're like, I know what this means, know what that means. But it also is completely foreign if you don't know what it means. So looking at this piece, the background is a sewing pattern, kind of. So I've used a sewing pattern, and ironically, this thing's actually like two collages. I collaged a sewing pattern to create another structure. So I didn't just get a piece of sewing pattern and then like glue it to a piece of board. I actually created a collage out of it. And I really like what it looks like, and I hate working with it. It is the most finicky, fussy material. It's literally tissue paper. Then compound that with the fact that it's like from the 70s. It's like degraded, and it's just so painful to work with. You know, you breathe wrong and it literally blows off your table, you know. But it has this skin-like quality that is unlike anything else. And especially when you really start gluing it down. So the background of this piece, and the background of all the pieces I did for my solo show at Bridge, for He Had Many, Many Friends, has that sewing pattern background. So each one of those patterns probably takes me 45 minutes to an hour or something just to do this background collage before I even start putting stuff on top. So that's what you see there. And again, I love the folds. I actually really like what happens with the material despite its fussiness. And you start seeing stuff where you're like, I should recognize that. Like, there's something about this. Even if you've never done sewing in your life, you look at it and you're like, there's clearly intent. Those marks aren't arbitrary, you know. And it's the elements of art to some degree. There's line and there's shape. And, we're already starting to tap into them. So, now thinking about the postmodern principles, well, I'm appropriating all the stuff. So now when we get to the images on the top, there's a woman who's speaking on a telephone. So already an antiquated image, right? Phones don't look like that. Phones haven't looked like that for 20 years, probably longer, But so that already sort of places it at a different time. It has a line character to it where you're like, it feels a little retro-y. So that particular object is out of a comic book, which is actually unusual for me to do now. I used to do a lot of work in comic books. There's a couple of artists that I follow on Instagram who do exquisite comic book work. I kind of avoid it because part of it is they're not as accessible to me in the haunts that I make, at least for the stuff that I'm interested in, right? So this lady, it's not like, oh, that's Wonder Woman, right? It's just some lady, right? I don't want Wolverine. I don't want Superman. Like, I want there to be something ubiquitous about her. And then you got this other image that feels very much like a lithograph, or maybe even like a woodcut or something. It has an even older antiquity to it. And that piece is actually from a book of practical magic that was written in the 1920s. And those illustrations are that old too. And the copy that I had that I was using isn't quite as old. I think my copy was from like the 50s, but it was just like a reprinting of this book. So there's certain things that I really like taking imagery from, because out of context, they seem really mystical. One of my favorite things that you'll see pop up a lot is sign language manuals, because sign language, if you don't speak it and then you see a drawing of it, looks like they're casting a spell. Like, it is the most kind of unsettling sort of looking thing. And then, these are already magic tricks, but it's like, I've taken the magic trick out of it. So now you're just like, there's a guy with a bottle and he's holding his finger over the bottle, but you're like, what is that? What is going on? And again, there's clearly something in the bottle too. And you can see that from this image. And that's the only imagery on this thing. There's a woman on the phone and a hand and a bottle. And if that's all it was, it would not be that interesting, frankly. But first of all, they have a relationship with each other. There is some foreground, background kind of interplay going on. There's definitely, sight lines that are connecting the pieces. When you look at old paintings, you're like, okay, well, where are the eyes of the figures going? Her eyes are cast down, but they're cast down directly at the hand that's in the piece. This is the kind of stuff that, looking at it now, I can tell you is going on. And I can't promise I thought of that when I made it, other than the fact that I have the background to unconsciously think about that stuff. It just feels right. And the reason it feels right is because of those things. But really what makes the piece, I always talk about like the third element. So it's like, okay, if I have these two things, you're like, cool, these are both interesting objects. I'm juxtaposing them so they, add new meaning to one another that neither of them had before. But something's just missing. Like, what is missing here? And so in this particular capacity, literally the capacity of your lungs, I've added text. So again, contemporary or, postmodern principles of art, we've got appropriation, we've got juxtaposition, we've got destruction. Now I'm adding text as well. And so the location of things, it's hard to not fall into certain tropes because they're effective. Why does every high school student draw big eyes and stuff like that, like on the back of their notebooks? Because eyes are powerful, and mouths are powerful, and hands are powerful. And they're both conceptually powerful and formally powerful. So you'll see a lot of my work, I'm covering eyes, or I'm, highlighting eyes, or covering mouths, or because we are naturally, as human beings, drawn to those features. If I draw two dots and an upturned crescent on a piece of paper, and I ask you what it is, people are going to say, oh, it's a smiley face. Like, no, it's not. It's 2 dots and a line, right? But we're so bred literally to be seeing features and recognizing features that we can't not look at them. And so when you disrupt that, when you cover an eye or you cover a mouth or you let something fall off the picture plane, it actually adds emphasis, ironically, or at least pulls emphasis away from like, ooh, it's a face. And I always like faces. So the capacity of your lungs, symbolically and formally, covering her mouth. There's something going on in this bottle. So we're already talking about the volumetric nature of things. My background in ceramics, like I'm so tied to the idea of like, what's the volume of a vessel? What is it for? I'm going to make a bowl for ice cream is going to be different than a bowl I make for soup, different than a bowl that I make for salad. The volume matters. And then the final thing that happens in a lot of my work, and specifically in this body of work that I did, and the thing that people will always ask me questions about, is the mark making. So something that I hadn't talked about up until this point is that personally, I feel like collage is a little bit dead if it's purely appropriated imagery. Even if you do a successful job juxtaposing it, it's sophisticated, you have good composition. I want to be part of the story. And so that means that I need to add my mark to it. And in this case, I literally have. And so the tools that I use for this are some of my tools that I learned in the graffiti culture. The whiteout pens are something that people use to tag stuff up all the time. You can get nice refined lines. It's a really high zinc content paint that is hard to buff, but it's also something I'm just familiar with. And you'll notice in my work that it's a very primitive mark. They're not refined. They're very raw. I usually don't go over things more than once or twice. It feels markier that way, almost like the cave paintings of Lascaux where you're blowing paint, where it's just like, it's just a mark. And so there's these crosses that I've employed to do that have a purely formal function to balance the piece out. The top right of the composition really needs visual balance. So there's strong red marks that are going to draw your attention up there. So that gives some fluidity through the piece. There's a very triangular composition. Wherever your eyes hit first, you're going to move around the piece. So say they land on the woman, her eyes lead you down to the hand, the direction of the bottle leads you up into the crosses. Like it just kind of moves back around. And then there's literally an arrow pointing back to the woman again. A lot of my work, I don't let you stay still that long because I want you to pay attention to everything that's in it, because there's not a lot in it. I mean, really what we're talking about is a background, a piece of text, and 2 images, and then some marks. There's 5 elements that you can look at, but you get to exchange back and forth on those elements. And then there's some conceptual stuff too. I mean, there's something conceptual about mark making beyond just a formal element, that it has aggressive isn't the right word, but it's powerful. I mean, you can't look at a mark like that and ignore it. There's nothing more basic or more powerful than 2 intersecting lines, and you're confronted with them while you're trying to make sense of the whole piece. And then the part that I always love is that last little hook, which is, by the way, there's also a title, which literally just, you kind of like, oh, cool, this is going to be maybe some information to help me answer the question. And you're like, more things to figure out now. So on occasion, I wander. What does that have to do with the capacity of her lungs? Is she wandering towards something, away from something? Her mood isn't particularly recognizable. And there's something about all of that that is the buy-in for the artist personally, because there's nothing here that you just look at and you're like, great, I'm done. But there's a lot of stuff that, if Todd looks at, or if Wes looks at, or if Joey looks at 10 years from now, maybe I interpret something different. Not that the piece has changed. It is what it is, and there's no going back on that. But there is something you have to play your part too. and there are symbols here for you to interpret, and your work is left to interpret.
How large are these pieces, Joey? They're not very large, right?
No, so this entire body of work was done on 5-inch by 7-inch envelopes, in the spirit of the fact that, over the last 5 years, I've been actually mailing these pieces. So there was just shy of 100 of them that I displayed as a group, but each of them is a very intimate scale.
And you made it so that you could mail them, but you also like the intimacy of that size as well, because it really draws you in. Is that correct?
Yeah, it forces engagement. The trick for most artists is you can make a viewer do just about anything, but there better be good buy-in. Like if I'm going to invest into making myself vulnerable enough to lean into your painting in a gallery space where people are paying attention to me, then there better be a payoff. And sometimes the payoff is like, ooh, I didn't notice this little object until I got 2 inches away or whatever.
Yeah, I love the fact that it draws you in. I recently went to a gallery where the artist had requested the gallery to put a mark on the floor. And the whole spiel before you even went in to look at the art was that the artist wanted you to spend 30 seconds looking at the piece before you moved on, which I thought was interesting. It's like, why would you go to a gallery or why would you go to a museum and not spend time, like actually spending a little time with that piece, right? But I guess in this day and age, sometimes you have to tell people, hey, you need to stop for a second, get off your damn phone and look at the art and experience it. And then if you don't like it, you can move on, but at least give it a moment, right?
Well, heck, if I am swiping left on the people that I want to, have potential romantic relationships with, and maybe I gave them 3 seconds, then why should I spend 30 looking at some guy's piece of art?
Oh, man.
The buy-in is important, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And as an artist, I am just as or more guilty of it than anybody. When Santa Fe has its, the Santa Fe Art District in Denver has its first Friday openings, there are galleries that I don't even walk into. I look through the window and I go, nope. You're lucky if you spend 30 seconds letting me decide whether I'm going to walk into your whole space, let alone am I going to spend 30 seconds with a piece. And I know better, right? And I'm still doing that. That's the culture that we've really harbored. And I think it's exactly the thing that we want, but it's the thing that we are not willing to invest into until somebody kind of forces us. So I love the idea that part of the way you were forced is just pure invitation. Look, I challenge you to give me 30 seconds. And people are like, fine, I'll give you 30 seconds. And then after 30 seconds, you're like, oh, great. I wanted that. I wanted that invitation. And I think the scale of my work is some of that invitation. You can't just walk by and yeah, it's a painting of a cat. I get it. You're like, oh man, what is going on with this? I gotta lean in a little bit. By the time you've given me 30 seconds, ironically, then you're ready to give me 30 minutes, but until you get to that point, it's that first 30 seconds. And again, it's just, even though my flippant comment about Tinder or whatever, it's that's the human thing, right? Once I say hi to you and shake your hand, then we can have a conversation.
Right. Then you have to engage.
Yeah.
Because now you've made a connection, right?
Exactly.
And yeah, your pieces draw you in and you can't just walk by them because you're going to see some kind of element that's going to suck you in. And because of their size, it's like a whisper, right? If you want to get somebody's attention, you don't necessarily have to yell. You can talk really quietly or whisper a little bit. And people lean in because all of a sudden they want to hear what you're going to say, right? It's the same thing. It's going to suck you in.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's beautiful.
I want to talk about one more piece before we let you go. This is a piece I thought was brilliant. And this one is called Already Doing Just Fine. I love what's going on here with the female figure and the different shapes.
Yeah, so this piece, just kind of quickly to describe it for anybody who isn't super cool and looking at it on my Instagram right now. So again, same kind of formula to some degree. There's a couple of places of imagery, there's a couple of marks, and there's some text. And in this particular case, this is very informed by my life as an artist. There's certain practices that we do, life drawing, learning how to do modeling by using shade and shadow. So you learn how to like draw a sphere for the first time. So my older brother, so this is what I love about this piece is I'm about to ruin this piece because you had a phenomenological experience. You were drawn to this for a very particular reason. And I know 1000% that the reason that you were drawn to it has nothing to do with the reason that I made this piece. But that doesn't mean it wasn't authentic, right? And so, anyway, so anybody's listening, sorry that I deprived this from you. But so my brother asked me recently if I could teach him how to draw. And my brother is 8 years older than me and is 1,000 times smarter than me. Not quite as handsome, but close. And he's an accountant, just like he's a genuinely good man. And it was like this humbling experience where I'm like, oh, I love you. Of course. Like, I'd love to teach you. He also lives in Seattle and is asking me to teach him how to draw from Denver. And I'm like, that's hard, man. Like that's a challenging thing. Not to mention the fact that I've already said that my proclivity is like, yeah, if you want to get good at drawing, go draw for 20 years. And so that's what I want to tell him, but I'm like, no, I'm not going to leave my brother hanging. Like, let me help. So this is born from me actually exploring some stuff about drawing to help my brother. So when you learn how to draw, several things happen, especially when you're teaching like, kids, but really somebody who doesn't have an art background, like I want to learn how to draw. What they're saying is, I want my drawings to look like stuff. And first of all, not every drawing has to look like stuff. And secondly, the stuff that really, really looks like stuff is boring to me. You're like, oh, that's photorealistic. Congratulations. Like, I don't care. Like I like the drawingness, like the illustrative quality of certain things. But the go-to thing that's like magic when you teach like a fifth grader is, yeah, look, if you shade in a gradient and you pay attention to where your light source is, you can make a circle turn into a sphere. And when kids do it, they're like, oh my gosh. And then you'll see on their notebooks, instead of pictures of eyes, there'll be spheres on like everything. And they have like high 45-degree drop shadows. And you're like, oh my gosh, like I can draw, because it's the first time in their life that they made a thing look quote unquote real. And it's powerful because what you're teaching them is like, yeah, you can render stuff to look like something that it isn't. Like I'm giving you this trompe l'oeil of a three-dimensional object on a piece of paper. Like that's charming and magical. But it's also super gimmicky to some degree. Like you're like, there's another sphere. There's 10,000 of them or whatever. And but it's like the first foray of power as an artist that you feel. So the next projection of that is making bodies look like bodies. And the really funny thing is people always obscure hands and faces and feet because they're hard. And so in this piece, her face is obscured, her feet are cut off, and the hand is like super janky paddle hand because it's just like, oh, I'm trying to get an expression of forms. The reality is I already know what boobs and hips and stuff look like. And not to diminish anybody's boobs or hips, but they don't look that different from the next set of boobs or hips, to be perfectly honest. What looks different is faces and hands and feet. Like if I looked at 1,000 thighs, I probably couldn't pick out which one of them is yours. Though I'm sure Wes has some nice thighs. Like I wouldn't be able to pick them out. But hands, I bet I could do that. If I knew you, I could pick out what your hands are. There's a weird thing that, having grown up in Colorado, we're all familiar with like the Dahmer party and some of the tragedies of that. One of the things is when different tragedies like that have happened, they've decided that if they had to eat someone else, that they intentionally say, we're not going to eat we're going to cut off their hands and their feet and their head, and we're going to set those aside because those are the human parts of a person. And that's why they're hard to draw, because those are the expressive components. Right now I'm on a podcast talking with my hands for no reason, right? Because I'm expressing something and I can't help it. And my face is expressing, and, People tell you to smile when you answer the phone because people can hear it, because you can, which is weird, right? So anyway, so looking at this, then I have this expression of a man who, interestingly enough, both of you guys chose images of somebody with closed, downcast eyes who has a line of sight toward the other images. I guess that's something I do apparently a lot. And he's old and he's wrinkled and he's not beautiful, but he's also deeply someone. Whereas that lady is not someone. That is a nude. That is not a person, right? He is a person with his wrinkly, saggy eyes and his furrowed brow and his big nose. And, like, that's what people look like. And so there's this weird juxtaposition conceptually between, look, everybody knows what shapes look like, right? Like, I know what a sphere looks like, and I know what a woman looks like on a formal basis. But none of those things are real, right? Because when's the last time you saw a perfect sphere? Never? Right. Doesn't exist, right? We have things that approximate it. When's the last time you saw I won't get into that question, a perfect woman, but, the ideal, form or something like that. The irony is that you need to get all that nonsense out of your head. Every fifth grader who draws a sphere and is excited because it looks real is lying, because it doesn't look real, because that's not what a ball looks like. That's what this idealized image of form looks like. I always mistake who it is. I think it was Matisse, whatever. Somebody with an M, probably French, historically famously said, if you ever wanted to draw a rose, you have to forget every rose that you've ever seen. Because you have to pay attention to what's actually in front of you. And so there's this guy who his eyes are closed, and the copy on this, the text that I've integrated, says knowing shapes. Well, again, philosophically reaching back, there's this idea of the forms being these perfect manifestations of things. So there's perfect redness and perfect, chastity and all this other stuff that exists in the realm of the forms. It's like, yeah, that's not true, man. Like, that's not a real thing. Like, the forms aren't real. The forms, or in this case, the shapes, reference something that's real. And so this guy is like stuck in his own head, not really looking at stuff. So anyway, so sort of I hope my brother's listening. So Jerry, don't do like this. Don't be like this guy. Like, if you want to draw a woman, then you got to hang out with some women. Don't just draw what you think they look like.
Oh man, I love it. I love your work, man. If people want to purchase these, how do you go about pricing your work for this collage work? Does it based on, I wouldn't think it was based on size necessarily, but maybe it is, or is it how much time you have into it?
It's probably the most challenging question that you could have asked. So there's two things that are going on with it. So the way that I price these particular pieces is that I price them all the same price. So, I made 100 something objects. They're all $50. Like, it is what it is. How did I come up with that idea? To some degree, it's a little bit arbitrary, right? Like, did it take me exactly $50 worth of labor? No, I don't know. One of them probably took longer than the other, et cetera. It's also very hard because, artists in general fall into this trap where, you don't want to alienate anybody who potentially could be buying your work. And for me, especially, like, I would be making work whether or not somebody bought it. And I'd rather you own it than me have it in my house. Like, it's meant to make that connection. And so I want to price it in such a way that isn't prohibitive to you. You're like, man, $500, like, I couldn't do that, but like $50, it's like, I think a lot of people could save $50 for a piece. We also live in a culture where value and money we pretend like they're synonymous. And so if I said, I don't know, $2, right, you'd be like, oh, that's not valuable at all. And what I like to exchange is value. So there have been times in my life where I have literally traded a thing for a thing. And that feels like a good exchange of value. There's been other times that I've traded, an intimate connection. Like, if I had a long conversation with you and we really connected, or we worked together on something or whatever, like, I might be compelled to gift it to you. Not like it's free, but it's here's a valuable thing that I want to share with you for sharing the value you share with me. So, to some degree, the answer is, look, if what you can do is $50 to show me that you value my time and my investment, sure, I'll make you that deal. But the other thing is like, look, if you want to approach me and you want to meet and you want to talk and you want to make stuff and you want to trade, like I'm totally game for all that. But how I price the work historically has been, I do know generally how much time down and dirty making I've invested into it, which isn't even close to the amount of time, right? Because it's like how many hundreds of hours of buying this stuff, whatever. But just like cutting, pasting, like that amount of time. Okay. And then I ascribe, a certain number to the hours, $20 an hour, $10 an hour, whatever, and then you start calculating that. What I used to do, and I still occasionally do, is I'll say, great, this is a 4-hour piece. So whatever you make in 4 hours is how much you need to pay me for it. So if you work at McDonald's and you make $12 an hour, then it's a $48 piece. But if you're a lawyer, then I'll probably make rent this month. That's the deal. And the reason why I like to do it that way is because even though America is so obsessed with money as an exchange of value, it's not real, right? Money's made up. It's not really a thing. But what's real is, what an hour of your labor is like, whatever it is that you do, what that hour of labor is. And so you're paid an amount for it. Just give me that exchange. So this is worth 4 hours. That's what I love to do. Now, in this particular presentation, I didn't do it that way because I just wanted to make something standard and easy, because that freaks people out most of the time. They're like, oh, look, they get real embarrassed. And then they also start like, I don't want to put people in a position where I'm like, oh, you gave me $4. Like, I'm sorry, man. I don't want to be weird like that, but I also don't want to be like, oh, $800. They must have a nice life. I don't want it to be this weird thing. So, so $50 a piece is what I was charging for these things, because it's a price that requires sacrifice for most Americans. And I think the sacrifice is what's important. Is this thing worth sacrificing for? For me, it was, because I invested into it. I invested the time and the energy and the money in procuring the materials. And what you're buying from me is definitely the object, but you're buying some kind of a part of my story and part of the relationship and part of these past 5 years of my life that you're buying into. And there's blood, sweat, and tears that, I paid into that. And that if you can show me that you respect the fact that I put my blood, sweat, and tears in it by making some small sacrifice, then that's a deal that we can make for sure.
That's beautiful, man. I love your approach to it. I mean, you're going to make these things no matter what, right?
Right.
And that's a different approach than I've heard at all,
Well, the two things are, number one, I'm blessed in a daytime profession where I'm stable enough where I don't have to be like, oh shoot, like my water bill's coming up or something, so I'm thankfully able to do that. But honestly, and you both kind of pointed out, it's like, yeah, I can't not make these things. This is how I'm working out the beauty and horror of humanity, and that they deserve to be shared. And in some cases, so an example is this. There was a lady who came to the opening who was very sweet and very insightful. And I remember her asking me this like beautiful, like lovely, naive question, which was, do you think that I should read your artist statement or should I just look at your work? And I loved the question because she can only do one of them forever. And once she chooses to do one of them, she ruins the other one and she can't go back. And that she basically asked for me to hold her hand through the process to do that. And it's totally appropriate to ask that question. And I was like, well, I prefer to just have that raw experience. She said, okay, that's what I'll do. And then afterwards, she talked to me about the experience and she's like, oh, I'm glad I did that because I didn't know this or whatever. And I ended up sending her a piece, not from the show, but a separate piece that I ended up making. And the book that you mentioned, Jenny's book, she was actually the first recipient of anything from that book. So I tore out a piece of paper and I wrote on the back of it. I was like, by the way, this is from some book from like the 1900s. Enjoy, and it was this first like exchange that we had because she already bought in. She bought in emotionally and personally into who I was. And the least I could do is respond in kind.
Man, it's been great to talk with you this evening. I've really enjoyed our conversation. So insightful. I'd love to have another conversation with you sometime in the future, and we can talk a little bit more about collage because you're the first collagist we've had on, and it's been very educational. If people want to purchase some of the work that they see on Instagram, they just reach out to you through Instagram. Is that the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, that's probably the best. So, there's three invitations I'll make. One is, if you want to purchase a piece, I still am partially being represented for the time being by the Bridge Project Gallery. So if you happen to ever go to that space, which you should, by the way, there's some really wonderful stuff going on there. You can ask either of the gallery owners, like, hey, I heard this Joey guy who talked a lot. Then you can, they can help you get pieces. You could even pick them up from there. You can definitely reach out to me at Radio Studios on Instagram. I'm the one that's running that page. I have other people that I will occasionally highlight, but it's predominantly my work right now. But I'm the one that you're going to exchange with, and we can work something out for pickup and payment and everything. And then the other thing is, if you're out there making work, wanting to get involved or whatever, right now, I miss teaching. There's no question about that. Part of my life was important. And I don't know that I can ever go back to it because of some of the traumas that I went through in a formal setting. But what I want to do is revitalize some of the making that's going on. And there's a lot of amazing stuff going on in Colorado, throughout the world right now with collage. Interestingly enough, in 5 days is International Collage Day. So there's a ton of stuff going on about that. I have a very dear friend of mine in Rochester who has a dedicated collage gallery called Veo Gallery, which if you reach out to me and I can send you information about it. She has an exclusive collage gallery. She has a beautiful opening going on that's international artists right now. I think she has like nearly 100 pieces that people have submitted. So there's very interesting things going on. And now is the time to take part in something. There's lots of beautiful artists you've had on here, beautiful minds and beautiful work. And some of them, even I will look at and be like, ooh, that's intimidating. They're very skilled and very talented in what they do. I don't want my work to be intimidating ever. And, as a teacher, I used to tell people like, oh, I can't draw a straight line to save my life. I'm like, oh, great, then don't. Like, you can just cut some paper and like that counts too. So I do want people to reach out to me. I'd love to sell some work to you. I'd love to create a relationship with you. The connection is really what I'm interested in. If you want to become a pen pal with me and like send me some cool scraps of stuff, like I'm into that. So, but my invitation is for International Collage Day for everybody to make something. So, you two guys are absolutely, the forefront on that invitation for you to make some kind of collaged object this week and post it somewhere. Maybe you stick it out, on the back of the stop sign somewhere. Maybe you mail it to a friend. All that stuff counts. But collage is the gateway drug that I think a lot of people maybe need to a professional making career, whether they're making money on it or not. It's the therapy that I think some people might need. And so if you're just like, man, I don't know where to start, I don't have a community or whatever, then I would be happy to be the ambassador for that.
Right on, man.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Do you have any shows or anything else coming up that you can tell our listeners about that they could look forward to?
Yeah. So there was a little bit of miscommunication when we actually launched my solo show at Bridge Project because I was going to do an invitational collage exhibition as well. And so that invitational is still happening. I have a bunch of artists who I consider way cooler and more interesting than me, who are making work very different from mine, stuff that I could never see myself doing, but I have a great amount of respect for. All collage artists from all over the world. I am currently trying to finalize a space for that. And so I have the work about halfway collected. A couple of people are still sending in some pieces. And so it's happening soon, and I don't know when or where. So if anybody has a space that wants to offer it to me in the general Denver metro area, then I have a killer show that's ready to go up. And if you don't have a space, I'm going to figure one out anyway. Then there is also a couple of pop-ups that I'm going to be doing. And the biggest thing this summer is going to be, I'm going to start some interventions in the street that may or may not be sanctioned by the city of Denver. And I'm going to start wheat pasting some of my work up, and I'm going to be cataloging that. So there is something that I don't want to completely reveal yet. It's going to be happening at the end of the summer that's tied to it. So the best way to keep track of that right now is to follow me on my Instagram, or to just reach out to me. I have a mailing list that I'm going to start up too, but it will be the beginning of something that will come to fruition right around August. And there is more to come on that, but I will reveal that when the time is right.
Perfect. Well, keep us posted. We'll make sure that we push that stuff out on our social media, man.
Absolutely.
Okay. So before we wrap up, I want to ask you to lead us out. During your talk, you talked in some depth about Oscar Wilde, and you had this great quote. Will you lead us out with that quote?
Yeah, so, Oscar Wilde wrote this beautiful piece when he was in prison called De Profundis. De Profundis in Latin means from the depths. And so that's a reference to the Psalms. Psalm 141 is, from the depths I cry out to you, Lord, hear my voice. But he was also in prison when he was writing this thing too. In it, he talks about a lot of really insightful, amazing things. One of which is he taps into, I really think, the core of what viewers need to know about art today, which is, at the end of the day, art is like Christ. It doesn't teach you anything, but by being brought into its presence, you become something. And that transformative quality of art, that's why I make the work. And that's why I view work. And if you ever find yourself looking at a piece of art and say, I don't know what it means, try to give yourself those 30 seconds to just let it guide you so that it changes who you are.
Right on, man. Joey, thank you so much. I really appreciate you spending time with us this evening. Keep us posted, like I said, and I look forward to seeing you in person sometime in the very near future. And I guess Wes and I have our work cut out for us to make some collage this week.
That's right. My mind is already swimming. And then Georgia, be bold. So I have that to go with too. So, which is a curse. Hey, Joey, I really appreciate you coming on our podcast. It means a lot to me. And I love your work. I love the idea of collages. And we need to get more collages on here, Todd, or collagers, or collages, whatever the right term is. Because this is some fun stuff. I love the deeper meaning that you can get from this. So I look forward to looking at more of your stuff more in depthly, and hopefully meeting you in the near future. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure. And, after this, you both owe me your addresses and I'll send you something.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
Awesome, man. For the Tenet Podcast, I'm Todd Pearson.
And I'm Wes Brown.
Have a great week.